Tonight we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends, and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 6 of the creepiest true night shift horror stories in Texas that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. The night shift teaches you what a building sounds like when it thinks it is alone. The ice maker hiccups in its sleep. The pharmacy cooler murmurs in a low, patient way that feels like breathing. The floor tiles settle with tiny ticks as if beetles are under the grout, marching in place. Past midnight, the highway becomes a dark river, and the store turns into a lit island in it. I would wipe the counter, count scratch-off tickets, nudge the coffee machine back to life, and watch the glass doors with the same attention a fisherman watches his bobber. The map by the lotto stand has our pin stuck near Fort Stockton, a red dot in a tan square of nothing. I always thought the map lied. At 2 in the morning you are nowhere, and nowhere is wide and flat and full of air that whistles across the pumps. The door chime is a single metal bell hung on a spring. It is a foolish little thing and has never once kept a robber from coming in. But it sings the way a cricket does, because singing is what it knows. That night it did not sing. One moment I was bent over the spill kit clipboard, checking off the stupid boxes we check every night for a leak that will never come. And the next there was a man standing in the aisle of jerky and radiator stop leak as if he had grown there. He wore a dark coat that looked heavy and damp, although my air conditioner was fighting the desert and losing. He walked with a steady slowness that made my own heartbeat feel clumsy. There was nothing remarkable about his face until you tried to remember it, even while you were looking at it. It refused to be stored. It kept sliding off whatever shelf the mind uses for faces. He did not browse. He reached out a long hand, took a pack of cigarettes that hasn't been behind the counter in a decade, then seemed to realize they were in the wrong place, and placed them on the formica in front of me without apology. As if my memory was at fault for moving the world around him, the quarters in the tip jar rattled once. I reached under, grabbed the correct brand, and set it down. My knuckles brushed his sleeve. It was cooler than the air. Not cold like a soda can, cold the way a well feels when you lean over it. I rang him up. The drawer thumped in and out. The receipt curled out, gray letters on off-white. I skimmed it like I always do. The time punched at my eyes. June 18th, 3:12 a.m. The clock above the beer cave said June 17th, 2:49. I glanced up at the security monitor as if it might show me the answer. The monitor showed him still approaching the counter while he stood at the counter in front of me. It was like seeing your own breath lag when you speak in winter. 5 seconds wrong, maybe 6. I swallowed and my tongue tasted like pennies. He slid a card that was not a card through the reader. I know the feel of magnetized plastic. What he set down had a fine grit to it, like an old photograph that has been in sand. It flashed a dull satin color and disappeared into the throat of the machine. The screen flickered and calmly announced -36 degrees Fahrenheit. The reader chimed, not the ding we hear 50 times a shift, but a short, round sound like a spoon tapping the rim of a glass underwater. The hairs on my arm lifted. The AC coughed and gave up against a fresh gust of heat rolling off the road. And yet the air at the counter stayed wrong, a pocket of cellar in a world of dry heat. He set a quarter beside the cigarettes. It wobbled on its edge, spun once, and settled with the eagle side up. The ridges were almost gone. The date was a ghost. No one tips cashiers on the interstate. We are machines that hand out keys to the bathroom and change for scratch-offs. I reached for the coin, and before I could stop myself, I said, "Too soft, too certain," like I was reciting a fact I had carried all my life. "There is no mile 402. The words were out, and I understood how a person could confess to a crime they had not committed simply to put their mouth away from the truth for a second. He did not smile. He looked at me with a weight that made my ankles ache. In the mirror behind the register, I could see us both, except I could only see myself. Where he stood was a smudge of too clean glass, like someone had wiped that part with alcohol, and the rest of it with the greasy rag we keep under the till. "You will hear about it," he said. His voice had the quality of a dial tone heard through a wall in a memory. It felt like someone calling my name from rooms I do not own. He turned and the bell tried to catch up but failed. The glass door pressed to his coat as if it were plastic wrap, then peeled itself back with a damp kiss. He walked across the bright rectangle of our forecourt and into the flat black river of exit ramp. No engine fired. The pumps did not twitch. The cameras showed the lot empty and the air steady. For a long minute I was a statue holding 2 cigarettes and a receipt from tomorrow. A moth ticked against the fluorescent tube overhead. A red ant dragged a breadcrumb across the tile by my left boot. The world resumed exactly where it had paused, as if nothing had been breathed into it at all. I put the quarter in the crack between the gum rack and the peeling edge of the counter laminate. I do not know why I did that. When the knock came, I flinched hard enough that a disposable lighter jumped out of its tray. The trooper on the other side of the glass had dust on his hat brim, and his eyes already looked like he had been pulling the night through his mouth and swallowing it raw. I thumbed the latch and he stepped in, waving off the AC like it was another question. The smell that came with him was dust and hot brakes. "Did you have a customer in a dark coat just now?" Tall, quiet. He did not ask if I had a receipt from tomorrow for him. I handed it over without being asked. His mouth tightened. He made a careful space in his voice. "I have heard men make that space when they refuse to name a thing in front of it. We've got a crash westbound. Call came in at 3:12. Folks say it's near mile 402. His eyes flicked to the map and the corner of his mouth pulled. There is no mile 402 on that stretch, and we both knew it. We both pretended we had not noticed we knew it. He took down my information as if there would be a form somewhere that could fit what I had to give. When he left, he hesitated on the threshold like the doorframe suddenly weighed a ton, and he had to push through it. I locked the door behind him and stood listening to the AC try and fail to steady the world. I put my hand on the quarter. It shocked a cold line into my skin that took a full minute to fade. Out by the pumps, the night kept itself lit with moth confetti. I tried to work. The coffee machine demanded a filter. The inventory sheet wanted counts that never match anyway. Every task slid off my attention. When the next customer came, a roughnecker with his shirt stuck to his back from some work going on somewhere in the scrub, I served him without remembering how, and when he left I went into the beer cave and stood among the cans and breathed until my breath came back with me. I lasted 20 minutes before I took my break early and walked out to the edge of the lot, where the exit ramp begins its curve to the west. The desert is not silent. It has small noises that pretend to be silence. The hum of highway far beyond sight, the whisper of sand moving an inch at a time, a night bird testing the air with a single note. I heard all that, and under it the thin thread of something electrical, like a radio somewhere turned way down between stations. I looked at the mile marker across the way, a green sign with white numbers, honest and stupid as a dog. It read 401. I knew from miles of driving home after dawn where 403 stood. Between them was a span that looked like every other span of I-10, and yet when you stare long enough you can feel the world making an exception. Nothing visible, only the sensation that the road is a sentence and there is a word missing from it, and your tongue can taste the empty. I finished my shift with a sore neck, a headache, and a resolve to forget. Memory does not allow forgetting on request. I slept badly and dreamed of the receipt paper unspooling across the store, looping around the pumps like a thin white snake, printing tomorrow in a steady stream that the wind couldn't tear. I woke before my alarm to a phone call I did not want to answer. It was the assistant manager. She asked if I could come in early because the morning guy had a dentist appointment and forgot to tell anyone. People forget to tell you the things that do not matter, so the things that do matter have room to sit quietly in your head and watch you look away. On the way in, the sun already up and washing the world in the kind of baked milk light that makes you think, maybe nothing can hide, I saw 3 state cars parked nose to nose on the shoulder. A wrecker faced the wrong way. There were cones and a triangular spill of shattered headlight glitter. A man in a safety vest moved his arms slowly like he was drifting underwater. I counted the markers with my eyes because I could not stop myself. 399, 400, 401, the empty thought, and then 403. The space between them seemed longer than space is allowed to be. I parked and went inside and lied badly when my boss asked how my night had been. Customers with opinions always show up on mornings when you would prefer no one speak. An older woman with a church bulletin on her front seat tucked lottery tickets into her purse and told me a story about her sister in Alpine. A kid who should have been in school bought an energy drink and said his cousin filmed something weird near the rest area, and could he plug his phone into our register to show me. The phone sputtered and displayed a dead battery symbol. I shook my head and he left. The clock chewed minutes off the day. At 11:30, I slid into the office to eat the day's 2 tacos and a clementine in peace. The office radio, a cheap thing that only knows static and country songs 4 years behind, had been left on. The noon news came in with a voice that tried to be cheerful about the weather and failed. There had been a fatality. Westbound. Authorities were investigating. They gave an exit name and then corrected themselves, then avoided saying a number. They asked anyone who had been in the area around 3 a.m. to call a line that sounded tired even in the anchor's mouth. I turned the volume down and ate 1 taco and left the other alone. The receipt in the trooper's pocket had told me what I already knew. Still, hearing the thing put into words made the floor feel older under my boots. The office smells of dust and citrus hand cleaner. I sat a while in that smell and listened to the cooler in the next room speak its patient word again and again, as if reminding me that machines do not believe in us. I could give you the details that ended up in papers and on websites that collect crashes like bottle caps. Someone saw brake lights ahead of them that would not resolve into a car. Someone else said a man in a dark coat walked along the shoulder, then through a guardrail without breaking his stride. I did not read those accounts. A friend texted me a link anyway, because friends are certain they help when they confirm the shape of your fear. I did not click it. I stood at the counter and sold jerky and cigarettes and cheap sunglasses to men whose eyes had learned not to see glare. I told myself 1,000 ordinary things. The way a person rehearses a prayer when lightning is far away and coming. There is a part of me that wants to make a lesson out of it. I could say the desert keeps a second road under the one we paved, and sometimes the two rub together and something sparks. I could say we make mile markers so we can pretend the world is divided into pieces that behave, and the world occasionally refuses. I could say a man came to my counter from a place where dates and times are more flexible than our machines allow, and he paid with a coin that had touched too many pockets to belong to a single year, and he warned me in the only way a person can warn a stranger who will not believe until they must. Any of those are stories I could tell to make this easier to hold. None of them are the thing that happened. What happened is, I stood in a convenience store in the dry dark of West Texas and met a traveler who did not arrive by door or by road, and my register printed tomorrow and my camera remembered yesterday, and a trooper came and checked a box in his book and tried not to meet my eyes because there is fellowship in terror, and he did not want it. What happened is there is a space between 2 green signs where the distance is wrong, and sometimes the highway grants an extra mile to someone who cannot use it. What happened is a quarter still sits under my counter. When business is slow, I press it to the inside of my wrist. The market leaves fades as all marks do, but slower than it should. I have learned the hour when the bell is least likely to ring. I have learned to clean the same coffee stain until I have erased it, and the memory of it and the memory of the memory. I have learned there is no use telling the night to behave. People come in exhausted and polite and leave more alive than when they arrived, and the road carries them on. Some do not come in at all. Some walk past our bright island and into the river where miles are elastic. On the worst nights, I stand under the security monitor and look at the version of myself 5 seconds behind and try to warn him with my eyes. He looks up when I do. We fail to tell each other the one thing we both most need to hear. If you drive this way, if the map says Fort Stockton in its quiet printed voice and the radio gives you nothing but weather and the low gossip of faraway towns, you will pass 401. Between there and 403, the desert opens flat and the stars sit on it like pushpins, and you will feel the road grow calm in a way that should comfort you and does not. If a pair of brake lights waits ahead without a car to carry them, if the air goes cold along your cheek as if a basement door has opened inside your window, if a man in a coat is walking where there is no shoulder to hold him, slow down, pull over, count your breath, watch the clock. If it reads 3:12, understand that time is not a fence. It is a suggestion. And if you stop in later and ask me what I saw, I will hand you a coffee and make change with the money of this year. And I will tell you nothing useful except that the cooler is breathing, and the lights are brave and the bell sometimes forgets to sing. I took the call because that is what I do when the ridge goes quiet and the radio sounds like a fishbowl. Voices bending through static and the sky pushing down hard enough to make a man feel small. Dispatch said single vehicle disabled on Ranch Road 32, past the picnic turnouts, near the limestone cut where the cedar presses against the pavement like it wants to swallow the asphalt back. She said the caller's voice kept dropping, that she heard breath and the words no brakes and then nothing. I had the amber on my roof already spinning, and the old International 4300 grumbling up out of Wimberley with the winch rattling like a bucket of bones. The night smelled like hot caliche and juniper, a sharp sap stink that gets in your teeth. People name the ridge Devil's Backbone because there are places where the land is all spine and no meat, and it has a way of putting its fingers into the steering of even the best driver. I have been a towman for 18 years and the backbone does not like me any better for the miles I have given it. I found the car where the road should have bent sharper than the map says. A silver sedan crouched sideways, nose crumpled, glass freckled across the shoulder like ice chips even though the air was a warm hand. No skid marks. That was the first thing that raised my neck. When people panic, they drag rubber like a plea. When the road takes them, there is a story written in black. There was no story here. The hood had folded into a clean V as if the car had been tenderly pressed against an invisible wedge. The guardrail had long dents from other nights, other drunks, but tonight it was untouched. I put the truck in park, listened to the engine settle, and stepped down into gravel that clicked under my boots with a loudness that told me how empty the backbone was at midnight. The hazard lights were dead, but the car's interior dome glowed weak like a heartbeat that could not make up its mind. The air tasted like coolant and something faint and sweet, a clean smell that did not belong to oil or antifreeze. I leaned in through the driver's side with my flashlight and saw the airbags limp and wrinkled as if someone had exhaled into them and then thought better of it. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was empty. In the back, bolted behind the driver, was a child seat covered in a quilted cover with a pattern of cartoon longhorns. I know how long fabric holds warmth after a body leaves it. I did not have to touch it to know, but I touched it anyway because sometimes you do the thing that hurts to make the hurt real. The pad was warm, not a ghost of warmth, not a trick from my fingers. Warm like someone had just been lifted from it. I had to breathe through my mouth when I realized that the sweet smell was from the child seat, that clean powder odor you only notice when you are a father or used to be. I called it in. The phone found 2 bars that stuttered into one and then settled into a mean 2 again. Trooper said he was 30 out and that I should set flares if I could, that a stray deer had turned his partner around back on 281. He told me not to put myself in danger and I said I never do, and we both heard the lie. I set triangles and popped the kit to stab 3 flares into the shoulder. Their little fires licked the rock and threw long copper shadows across the limestone. The ridge ate the light by degrees until it seemed like my truck and the car were floating, edges uncertain. The backbone has its own weather and its own rules. It collects stories. I have heard them in diners and on the radio and from broken people. A woman that hitchhikes and never remembers where she is going. A Confederate boy who waves cattle over the edge. A man with a length of chain coiled like a pet in the back seat, dragging it along the asphalt for the sound alone. Most of the stories have a chain in them. Steel talks to stone here and the conversation is older than asphalt. Work keeps a man sane when the land wants to make him a listener instead of a doer. I hauled my cable to the sedan and braced under the nose, fingers going numb from touching bent steel. The winch line hummed like a throat. I lashed the front end and felt the car give me its weight. It felt like more than a sedan should weigh, as if it had stones in its trunk, as if it had an ocean inside. The driver's door creaked wider as the frame shifted. A small plastic cup rolled out and tapped the heel of my boot, with a sound that rattled me more than I care to admit. The cup was bright blue with a spill-proof top. There was a smear of apple juice dried on its side. Beside it, half under the seat, a little white sock with a blue toe. Sometimes a road does not need to show you blood to make you feel the cut. I told myself there was a mother down in the cedar, or a father, that someone was standing off the shoulder with their phone up trying to make a call that would not complete, that they had crawled free and taken their child and gone looking for a light. I shouted. My voice went out, came back smaller, and then did not come back at all. The whole ridge had leaned in to listen. Far off, an owl asked a question and got no answer. The breeze came in from the west and carried cedar dust into my eyes until they watered. I walked the shoulder with my light slicing the dark. Found nothing but a scuffed arc where a knee had touched gravel, and a print like a heel pressed once, then not again. I crossed to the other side and swung the light over the opposite slope, where prickly pear huddles in clumps and the limestone breaks in shelves and ledges. There were no snapping branches, no crying, no scrapes. Only the little restless voice of the winch line ticking on its drum as the truck settled. When I climbed back up into the cab to kill the radio chatter, I smelled it in there too. Powder, faint and clean, cut through with leather and stale coffee. My back bench seat was empty, but the smell came from there like a presence just out of sight. The CB crackled once and then gave me my own voice bounced back in a smear. I toggled off and sat with my hands on the wheel while the amber bar painted the ridge that nervous, sickly yellow. When you do this long enough, you develop a private sonar. Sometimes it saves you. Sometimes it points you toward the wrong kind of deep. Mine told me that whatever had happened here had not finished happening. Time was not a line on the backbone. It was a loop or a lariat. I eased the truck forward, slackened, tightened, and felt the sedan come grudgingly up the shallow slope until it perched right on the shoulder as if it had always wanted to be tidy. The mouth of the limestone cut smiled its white teeth at us, and far below the valley cradled a darkness that looked like water. I chalked the wheels, then walked back to check my hooks. My chain was old but honest. Heavy links that have pulled cattle trailers and rolled pickups out of barrow ditches. Links that carry every job like a scar. One of the loose tails rasped across the asphalt on a gust and rang a single note that sounded like a spoon tapped against a glass to get attention, just before a big announcement. I bent to tuck it back and felt cold shoot up through my fingertips and walk my bones. The chain was cold as a spring even in the Texas night. I let it go and the tail swung and tapped the child seat through the open back door. The tap made no sense, but it happened. The chain lifted, kissed the fabric lightly, and dropped of its own weight. I am not a praying man. I'm a man who talks out loud in empty places just to fill them. So I said, "Someone is coming." I said, "Hold on." I said, "I am here." Then I heard a sound that should have been ordinary and was not. A car chime, that soft ding a vehicle makes when you leave a door ajar. It came from the sedan. The dome light breathed brighter for a second, and I swear on the tools of my trade, I saw the belt on the child seat twitch like a small impatient hand had pushed it away. I stepped forward before my courage could go thin and gripped that belt, and it was warm. The ridge held its breath. The flares hissed and spat, and their light shook. The belt warmed my palm as if blood ran through it. I squeezed until my knuckles went white and said, "Little one." Then something chimed again. Not a door, a melody high as a music box. It took me a second to place it because I am an old dog with old songs, but I had heard it before. A plastic toy phone. The kind that plays 3 bars of a lullaby and then quits so the parent can have their mind back. 3 bars and done. 3 bars and done. I have not heard that sound since my girl was little enough to kick at wind. I had not been thinking of her at all tonight until that sound. That is the way of the backbone. It empties you out and then fills you with whatever hurts you most. The phone in my pocket buzzed and showed me no service. The CB clicked and gave me breath. The night moved. Out past my flares on the crown of the road, I saw footprints I had not seen before. The dew throws its own map across the asphalt, and when something warm presses it, a path shows up like a stuttered quotation from a longer book. 2 small ovals angled toward the center line. They walked into the road and then stopped like the child had changed their mind. There were no adult prints. There were no claw marks or pad marks. I followed them to the painted line, and they ended there as cleanly as the skid marks had failed to begin. Across the ridge, the hill country pitched away into folds and black rivers of oak. Somewhere out there, a coyote carried on a conversation with another coyote who did not want to be part of it. I stood with my toes on the line and felt the backbone lift its chin under me. I went back to my truck and got the big light, the one that makes deer think dawn came early. I swung it up the road toward the next curve, and that was when I saw the reflection. A low oval in the brush at shoulder height, the kind of cold shine you get off a plastic lens. I walked toward it fast enough to feel my boot edges. I told myself it was a taillight. It was not. It was a baby monitor camera, one of the new ones people clip in their cars to see their kids on a phone screen. It had lodged in the lacework of cedar branches. When I reached for it, the battery light winked twice and then again, like it was too polite to admit it had no power. I held it, and for a split second I saw not a road or a truck or my own ugly face, but a little square picture of the back seat of a silver sedan. In the picture, a child's seat sat empty and then did not. For a breath, there was a blur of pale hair and a cheek and a hand, and then the screen went to frost, and then it died. I held it until my palm chilled to match the plastic, and then I put it in the cab on the passenger seat because I did not want to put it anywhere else. You start to draw lines then, the kind that go from then to now with a straightness that does not hold if you look too long. Someone lost control without leaving a mark. Someone climbed out or was lifted out and made small prints and dropped. A camera that showed me something I did not want to believe. The belt had warmed, the chain had moved, and the ridge was leaned in too hard. I have also learned that you do not leave a scene until the state says you can. If you decide the rules are for other men, the backbone corrects you in its own voice. I went to make the sedan ready for the bed. The winch took the weight and then more weight. The cable whined and the bed tilted and the whole world creaked like a tooth being pulled. As the car came up, the front end pitched and the trunk popped with a sound like a relieved sigh. The lid rose 2 inches and hung there. I set the brake on my bed hard, set my feet, and lifted the trunk with both hands. Inside the trunk was a travel stroller, a diaper bag, and a tow chain coiled like a sleeping dog. Not a tow strap, not a bungee. The kind of chain I use, heavy as small sin. It did not belong in that trunk any more than it belonged in my head. It was clean where it had lain, as if someone kept it oiled. When I leaned in, the smell of powder grew stronger, and underneath it was a mineral smell like cave water. The chain eased an inch against itself. It made a whisper of metal. I did not want my hands on it. I closed the trunk and it did not close because the latch had bent. The flares were guttering. I pulled them, set new ones, walked back through my own lights and watched the shadows of the chain tails writhe against the road like snakes that had made up their mind. I told myself sleep was the enemy and talked to the truck like it was a friend who could be shamed into standing tall. I told myself the trooper would arrive in 15. 15 stretched. The CB gave me back a sound like someone scratching their throat before speaking. The baby monitor on my passenger seat lit again with no power and showed me rain. It was not raining. On the screen it rained across upholstery, and the drops crawled backwards toward the glass as if pulled up by a choice they did not get to make. A voice small as a pinhead said, "Mama." Not a sob. A statement. I made a sound then that I would not like to hear played back. You get one of 2 choices in this work on nights like this. You get to be the man who waits for help while looking at his boots, or you get to be the man who makes himself useful while the blood in his ears tries to drown him. I put on gloves and set my hands to what I know. The chain that had kissed the child seat would not lie where I had tucked it. It had a mind to swing and arc toward the cab. I wrapped it twice around the hook and it found a third wrap by itself. When I turned to fetch the strap to double my safety, it was gone. Not gone out of the world, gone out of my hand. The tail snaked past my thigh and laid itself over the threshold of my door. I can tell you that because I felt it touch my jeans. It made a path across the rubber mat like a slug leaves a shine, except the shine was frost, blooming in the heat. I watched my own breath fog and had to laugh because the night around me was still a skillet. The frost traced itself up along the seat to the place where the child would be and stopped there. My bench gave under something small, the kind of give you get when you carry a sleeping kid into a dark house and lower them into bed. The quilted cover on the child's seat in the sedan brushed itself smooth without wind. The baby monitor screen warmed my hip, and when I looked, it showed me my own cab as if a camera were mounted up under my roof. It showed an empty bench and then it did not. A shape resolved there the way a figure comes out of fog when you commit to looking. Little shoulders leaned forward, then settled back. A curl of hair lifted and dropped. The chain lay across small legs like a blanket someone too strong had put down too hard. The road spoke then, not in voices, in physics. My truck rolled half an inch against the chocks like something behind it had given a careful push. The sedan moaned on the bed, its suspension agreeing to an argument. I grabbed for the brake again with a hand I told to be steady. The hill country breathes. The backbone moves under you as if it were alive and choosing. There are men who say the Spanish buried something along here, gold or bones, and that the land still resents being crossed. I have no use for those kinds of stories because they give the land too much intention. What it has is habit, and tonight the habit was the sound of a chain dragged just enough to warn and not enough to break. Blue light touched the cedar ahead of me, and I almost broke down with relief. But it was not a trooper's strobe. It came from nowhere, and it washed me and the truck and the sedan in a soft, unreachable color, the way some people remember their first safe place. I stood in it and had to put my hand on the fender because my knees did not belong to me for a second. When the color drained, the night seemed deeper than before. A car crested the curve from the Blanco side, a minivan, tired headlights. It slowed, took in my flares, and crept around like a cat around a bath. As it passed me, the driver lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in that Texas way. In the back seat, a pale shape stirred, and the small face turned and pressed against the glass. The weight on my bench took a breath then, or I imagined it did, and the monitor showed rain that was not there. The minivan's brake lights flared. It stopped 40 yards past my truck and sat idling with the red blooming on limestone. Doors did not open. I walked toward it because you do what the scene asks of you. When I got even with the rear bumper, the driver's side window rolled down and a woman stared out at me with eyes that had been crying for a year. She said, "I think I lost something," but the last word came out wrong, like she meant time or mind or years. She looked past me at my truck and the car on the bed and the flares crawling toward ash and the ridge gathering itself in. She said, "Do you have my baby?" She did not make it a question. I told her no, because that was the truth I could hold. She looked at the passenger seat beside her, and then back at me. The seat was empty. I am not fool enough to say I saw it full. I did not. But my bench in the truck dipped again. The monitor showed a hand, open and clean and complete in a way that hurt. The woman raised both hands to her face like she was trying to keep it from falling apart and said, I heard her laughing. And then she put the van in drive and went ahead, down the road at a speed that said she was choosing one danger to outrun another. I stood in the red taillight afterwash and knew that I had done nothing but mark the time between someone making a call and the world deciding what it would do next. The trooper never found his way to me because this is the backbone and radios get tired. I waited another 10 and the chains did their whispering, and the seat did its small breathing and the ridge leaned and the flares went to nothing. The child's belt in the sedan had warmed and then cooled, and that felt like a mercy I did not deserve. I went to the cab and sat because my legs had votes too. When I did, the weight on the bench shifted toward me the way a child tips toward a driver on a long road without really waking, the way my girl used to when the highway got its hum just right. I put my hand down on the vinyl without looking, and the cold climbed my arm and the smell of powder put me back in a small house where I used to live a different life. I told whatever was beside me that we were going. I told it that if it wanted to ride with me, it had to be quiet and hold on. I told it that the chain was not for it and not for me. I told the road I was not interested in what it liked or what it hated. Then I took the truck out of park, eased the bed flat, and felt the sedan settle into my keeping. The first mile back toward town, the chain sang low and clean, a river of metal talking to itself. The second mile, it went quiet. The third mile, something small shifted on the bench and the monitor lit and showed me a man with a tired face driving a truck he had driven 1,000 times. A man with his hand open on a seat and an absence where a child should be. The picture stuttered and warped as if someone were dragging it backward across the glass with a magnet. The rain on the screen fell up. The taillights of the van I had seen earlier showed ahead of me again in places where the road said there should be no van. The amber on my roof painted the rocks and then painted them again. The backbone lifted its chin. Time slowed the way a deer slows when it decides to step into the road after all. The radio opened its throat and gave me my own voice. I heard myself saying, I am here. I heard myself saying, hold on. I heard the part where my voice shook and I could not hide it. Then I heard another voice, small and certain as a bell. Mama, not a sob, a location. The sound came from everywhere at once, and it came from the chain, and it came from the bench where a weight sat. The curve ahead tightened in a way I do not allow. My hands did their old work. I am not a man who leaves skid marks when the road takes him. I stay between lines that feel like rails. But the backbone wants what it wants, and when it decides, it is a gentle hand on the wheel that does not care what you think. My mirrors filled with blue that was not law, and red that was not break, and a white that was not daylight. The chain reared and laid down again with a thud that sounded like a door closing. My truck rolled a calm half-foot toward the guardrail and stopped because the chocks I had forgotten to pull chattered up against their own will. I laughed then like a man who has been spared by a mistake he did not mean to make. The monitor went black. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, the engine licking at idle, the ridge breathing, and knew before I knew that I had not been spared anything. I had been borrowed. I looked down at my right boot because something tugged it gently, the way a child tugs a sleeve to signal a need without words. The end of the chain that had crept up into the cab lay across my toe and under it, and linked to it lay a second chain with smaller links, the kind you use to hold a swing on a porch. It jangled once, a bright little sound that was a lullaby all by itself. My boot felt colder than the stone of the ridge. I leaned to lift it and the chain moved out from under as if it were shy. When I straightened, the chain had arranged itself back across the bench around nothing. It made a belt out of metal where no belt was needed. It held, and that was the word that chilled me worse than any ghost. Hold. That was the command in it and the comfort. Headlights came up behind me. The exact curve, the exact tilt of amber across cedar that I had seen when I arrived. A truck and a car in my mirror laid out in the same picture I would have sworn was mine and not mine. I reached for the CB because a man warns himself if he can. Static did what static does. The truck behind me pulled up and slowed and set triangles and stepped into my scene with the careful, plain grace of a man who has done the job too long. I watched myself get out of a truck and walk toward a silver sedan and touch the child's seat and answer a phone that would not answer me. I watched myself bend to a chain tail and tuck it and watch it touch the seat on its own. Round and round the ridge went. The backbone lifted its chin, satisfied with its own habit. There is a kind of choice that is not a choice. It comes dressed as duty, so you do not think to refuse it. I slipped the truck into park and put my hand on the seat. I said, "Tell me your name." The chain tapped twice, an impatient coin on a table. In another life, I would have learned those taps and written down a language in links and frost and lullabies. But you do not get more than one life on the backbone. The trooper would arrive in 15 only on a night that belonged to someone else. The woman in the van would drive and drive to hold off a kind of truth that gnaws through doors. The man in my mirror would stand in his own footprints. I sat there with the weight beside me and the monitor dead and the ridge counting its own breaths and understood that the warm child seat had been all the invitation I was going to get. It said here, it said hold, it said drive, so I did. I eased the truck forward into the loop, carrying the sedan that had already been carried, following the taillights of a van that could be anywhere but was always just ahead, feeling the chain nestle across an absence that meant more than any presence. The ridge swung its long back under my tires, and the oaks leaned in and the limestone kept its old counsel, and the devil's backbone reached one long bony hand and set it against my wheel in a touch that was not mean and not kind and not anything a man can argue with. Somewhere far off a child laughed, a sound like rain in reverse, and I drove toward it because the only way out on that road is to go deeper in, and because somebody had to hold the thing that wanted holding, until the ridge decided it was done being a ridge and wanted to be a road again. By the time I hit the big green sign for exit 751, the night had thinned to the kind of darkness that feels cooked down, a reduction, thick and shiny and clinging to the shoulders. The highway ran flat as a stretched bandage across the rice fields and coastal prairie east of Houston. Sodium lights burned around the refineries a long way off, throwing their orange crowns into low clouds. My radio was low, just the AM hiss of a talk station dying by inches. The clock on the dash was stubborn about 2:04. I remember that because it stayed there longer than made sense. I had come off a 12 in the ER with the usual parade. A welder with a burned forearm. A woman who insisted her chest tightness was from a jalapeno burger until the troponin said otherwise. A guy who swore he fell down the steps when the pattern of bruises wrote something else. The last one of the night should have been routine. A fender bender on a feeder road near the mall. Young mother, toddler in a seat, both stable, both more shaken than hurt. I'd peeled off a hospital bracelet from a previous admission still snagged on the mother's wrist, while she argued with a man who wasn't the child's father. I had said the words we say, that they should both be seen upstairs for a quick observation, that she should call someone who loved her to sit with her, that being scared after a crash is a wound we can't see. She signed her refusal. I watched her walk out. I still had the indentation across my palm where the plastic band had pressed as I folded it into the trash. The freeway slid by, The fields breathing mist, ditches choked with Johnson grass. I took a sip from a bottle of water and felt the wheel vibrate to the little ridges between lanes. It was a lonely hour. Semis were ribbons of light far ahead, and a pair of taillights went by me and were gone. The sign for exit 751 flashed again in the distance. I frowned because I'd just passed it. Between the exit signs, the shoulder widened into a shallow runoff, and there it was. The SUV lay on its roof in the median like an animal trying to burrow into the earth and cover itself. It was a late model, dark paint, the kind of vehicle with soccer ball decals and a PTO sticker, the kind you can imagine a child asleep in on a long drive. Steam wreathed from the crumpled hood. The headlights had blown out and the hazard flashers pulsed with a metronome patience red, red, red on the weeds and the cable barrier. The glass glittered like a lake of sugar. I slowed, I looked for motion, I scanned for flares or a trooper's cruiser or the humped silhouette of someone running. I didn't see another car, another person, any interruption in all that flatness. I know what you're supposed to do. ER training is a set of reflexes layered over the bones. You park past the wreck with your hazards on. You keep a distance and angle the car so if someone hits you, they push you into the shoulder instead of into the wreck. You grab gloves if you have them because blood isn't the only thing that can change your life. You call it in before you put hands on anyone. I put my blinker on and then I didn't. I drove past with my hands tight on the wheel and my mouth gone cotton dry. I told myself I should get to the next exit and double back. I told myself someone had already called. I told myself a state trooper would appear like the road had conjured him. I looked into the rear view and saw the upturned mass falling away in the middle of the highway, a black beetle, twitching red. The sign for exit 751 marched over me again a minute later, a green rectangle, white numbers, the shining of promise. It made no sense. I had not looped. I had not turned around. The odometer ticked forward. The radio hissed, and a preacher's cadence climbed out of the static just long enough to shape a sentence about mercy before fading to noise. A field of white herons lifted and settled by a drainage canal. My heart thumped a warning that had no words attached. The SUV lay ahead of me again. At first, I thought it was a different accident. People pile up on I-10 when fog pools low and headlights turn to halos. But this was the same vehicle, same pattern of mesh embedded in the rear quarter panel, same bumper sticker with a school mascot, same crack running like a fault line across the rear glass, same flares of steam, same patient blink of hazards. It waited like a test I had failed once and been offered again. I felt embarrassment spill through me, bright as a blush in the dark. The part of me that keeps people from dying put a hand on my shoulder and said no more. I braked harder than I should have and felt the car shimmy. The tires scolded the asphalt. I pulled onto the shoulder ahead of the wreck and angled my wheels. The night pressed in. I turned off the radio. The silence rang. My phone didn't have service. The bars were there and then they weren't. The icon jumping like a loaded die. I dialed anyway and got the illusion of a call attempting to connect. A call that went on like holding your breath. The hazard flashers from the wreck strobed on the metal cables separating lanes, painting the weeds with red and deeper red. I stepped out. The air smelled of radiator fluid and hot rubber. That scent carries me back to childhood and summer nights with my father under a truck in a garage with the big door open and the Astros losing on a portable radio. Fireflies flared desultory and winked out. A far train laid its horn low over everything, a sound like a long hand on the earth. My shoes pushed through torn grass and caught in shredded plastic. I clicked the flashlight on my phone. The beam cut a harsh tunnel through the mist and bounced. The SUV had taken its beating well. The front end was accordioned, but the cabin looked mostly intact. A miracle you see daily and never get used to. The driver's window was blown out. The vehicle lay on its back like it could be flipped and sent on its way. I crouched and called out. I used the voice I use with frightened people who have lost an instant and want to know what has happened to their life. I said I was a nurse. I said I was here to help. I heard only the tick of hot metal cooling. I smelled something sweet and wrong underneath the antifreeze, like someone had dropped a bag of fruit behind a heater and forgotten it a week. Then the smell was gone, or it had been my stomach turning a trick. A child seat was strapped behind the passenger seat. It was one of the good ones with the 5-point harness and the tags uncut, the kind you read about and then save up for. My light touched it and stopped. The straps were unthreaded like someone had pulled the child out and not bothered to reweave them. The seat itself wasn't torn. I set the phone against the headliner and slid my hand over the cushion. It was warm. Not body warm, not fever warm, but warm in a way nothing else around it was. I had been in the night for minutes that could have been hours. The dew had licked everything cold. I held my palm there and felt the dent where a small body had been. I swallowed and called out again, louder. On the ceiling, dirt and grass clung like confetti. The driver's seatbelt hung limp where the pretensioner hadn't fired. There were no skid marks on the highway. I had noted it in passing without meaning to. Some part of the brain keeps books like that. If you come to a stop without trying to, sometimes it means you never knew it was coming. Sometimes it means you were not there to know it. I tried again to call. The phone made a noise under my thumb the way crickets make noise that might be silence or song. On the floor, where the center console had torn loose, lay a hospital bracelet. I knew it by the cheapness of the plastic and the kind of print that smears if you catch it with sanitizer. I picked it up and felt the stiffness from where it had been wrapped. The ID band was uncut. The clasp had not been broken. I turned it so my light could find the name. It was mine. My surname glared back at me, 4 letters at once ordinary and indecent. The first name was not mine. The first name was Grace, the middle initial matched my mother's. The date of birth was a number that would put this Grace at 2 years old. I stood in the breathing dark with all the fields and refineries and coastlands holding their breath, and I said the word that wants to be a prayer in moments like this. I said no. I put the bracelet down and then picked it up again because you do useless things when the world tips. The name did not change. I looked at the child's seat and the unthreaded harness and felt my mouth taste like pennies. A set of headlights snowplowed toward me in the far lane, white and remote. The driver must have seen my hazards and lifted off the gas, but no one slowed enough for this to be their problem. The train horn sounded again, thinner now. I crawled farther into the vehicle and patted the driver's seat, the floor, the space where a purse might have slid. Gum wrappers, a straw, a sticky coin, a hair tie with someone's blonde caught in it. The rear cargo area had spilled only a little. A blanket, the sort with cartoon stars. I touched it and remembered the mother at the ER with a toddler like a warm stare on her hip. She had been tired in a way that makes people mean. She had signed where we told her to sign and gone out past the parking booth and into the night. And then she had not come back. Had I done enough? Had I said the right thing? The answer is always yes until it is no. I backed out into air that tasted like metal and wet paper. The highway was mine for a span of seconds, the way a river belongs to the stone that breaks it. I walked the margin of the road and shone my light for bodies. We use that word at work like it is neutral because it has to be. The weeds swayed with cars that were nowhere near. I saw no one. I knelt and pressed my fingers to the dirt where the median sloped, feeling for the warmth of a touch, of a knee, of a handprint. The earth felt like a closed book. I returned to the open driver's window to call again, and in the glass of my car door I caught my reflection with the flashlight glare across my face. There was a smear at my hairline like I had touched my head with a greasy hand. I reached up and felt a raised ridge where earlier that night a frightened man had slung his arm out wildly, and his watch had cut me. I traced the line and saw that the smear was not new. It was the brown of hours on skin. My breath shuddered. Whatever had happened here had happened long enough ago for the warmth to make no sense at all. Behind me, the green sign loomed again, pale and blank as a hospital hallway wall. Exit 751. It hung above us like a command that could not be fulfilled. I looked at my phone, which had found a bar. I called 911. It rang. A woman answered and said 911 in the exact even tone we are taught to use. I began to speak and heard my voice come through a half-second late, as if the call had been routed back into my car. I listened to myself describe a flipped vehicle near exit 751 with no visible occupants, a baby seat still warm, and a bracelet with my name. The other voice took my words with the patience of someone very tired. My mouth moved and the other me spoke at the same time, and the same breath caught in our throat. I hung up. The last word clung to the line like a coat to a nail. I did what you do when talking doesn't fix the air. I braced my feet and tried to roll the SUV. That kind of thing requires a second body and a bad plan. The vehicle groaned and settled deeper as if insulted by my insistence. I yelled for anyone inside to cover their face, and loud sound shockwaved in the bowl of night and returned to me in a smaller voice. My chest hurt where I had balled up my fists in it without approving the motion. Headlights bloomed behind me, closed this time. I turned, relief rising, and saw a patrol car pull up on the shoulder behind my car. The light bar flickered once and went still. The engine ticked. No one got out. I raised my hands and stepped into the cones of the lights, expecting the hard questions, the ones I will answer like a student eager to please. The driver's door never opened. The windshield lay black. I could see the separate reflections of the red hazard blinkers from the wreck make little coins on the patrol car's hood, and then disappear. I took another step and felt the gravel under my shoes give like teeth. I did not want to go closer. I did anyway. When I reached the driver's window, I looked in and saw my car behind the glass where the trooper's seat should have been. It was mine down to the scrapes on the plastic near the door pocket, mine down to the old receipt-leaking purple type. The gas needle hovered just below half where it had been on the drive out of the hospital lot. I staggered back and turned to find my car still sitting where I had left it, hazards clicking like a metronome in an empty room. The patrol car was a mirror that had forgotten which side was real. The train horn laid its hand across the prairie for a third time and left a loneliness when it removed it. I went back to the SUV and put my head and shoulders inside. I reached for the child seat because I needed to feel its warmth again as a proof that something had happened, that this was not a story the road was telling itself for company. My fingers found the indentation. I felt a residual heat like from a laundry room minutes after the dryer has shut off. The seat buckled into an anchor point that had bent at some point in the roll, and I pressed it, and the whole seat shifted and then clicked into a shallower notch the way a memory sometimes does when you let it. Underneath where the plastic shell had lifted was a second hospital bracelet. This one had my first name. The date of birth was mine. The admission date printed along the side was today's date, and the time stamped below it was 2:04. I sat in the upside-down vehicle and read the numbers until they lost meaning, until they became a set of curves and lines. I read them with the certainty of a nurse who knows what time means and when it stops. I had not noticed it, but the night had grown fixed. A layer of mist hovered, thin as gauze, not moving in drafts it should have obeyed. The red blink of the hazard light stopped occurring in between. Each pulse arrived because the last pulse allowed it. The noises were only the ones you would expect if you wrote them down ahead of time. In that filing cabinet part of my mind, I felt a folder slide open and an old thing step out with my mother's voice. She had once told me that the roads between places are as haunted as any graveyard, because they hold all the choices we made at 80 miles an hour with a song on. She had said it to scare me and to save me. I had rolled my eyes then. Now I pressed the bracelet, my bracelet, between my fingers and thought of the mother who refused admission and walked out into a thin morning the color of paper. Out in the median, a shadow deepened. I do not mean it moved. I mean that the darkness recalculated itself to include a new answer. A shape suggested itself as a figure only because we are built to find a body where we can. It was the height of a woman like me, and it stood at the angle a woman like me stands when she leans down to unthread the harness of a screaming child. The impression of hair lifted in wind that did not exist. The suggestion of hands presented palms up to a sky low as a ceiling. It did not look at me. It did not have to. Every part of me leaned to that place as if to finish a gesture left unfinished in the ER parking lot. I stepped back from the SUV and felt my foot catch on the cable barrier. I climbed over and into the median as if crossing meant choosing a life. The weeds scratched my shins. The figure did not resolve into a person. It stayed a hole in the night from which cold seeped. I spoke to it the way I speak to people who think that their fear is the only thing left that is theirs. I said I was sorry. I said I should have stopped the first time. I said there is a place upstairs with chairs and warm blankets and cartoons that run quietly on ceiling-mounted televisions. I said there is a way to sit and breathe while someone counts for you. I said the names of the saints we do not believe in when we are busy. I did not know who I was talking to. The figure did not move. I felt a pressure behind my ears that comes before you faint or before a storm breaks. The bracelet in my fist bit into my palm, and that small pain was mine and saved me for another second. I knew the way you know a diagnosis before the labs arrive what the story was. I had left the hospital and gotten on the freeway, and passed exit 751 and seen an accident and driven by and told myself I would call from the next exit, and then I had not reached the next exit because time had not allowed. I had come around again and again, and the hour had become a ring dropped in tall grass. Somewhere in there a vehicle had flipped and done it with the speed of a thought. Somewhere in there a child had been unbuckled by hands urgent enough to unthread a harness and gentle enough to leave a warmth. Somewhere in there, a body with my name had been admitted to a place where time is wet and pliable, and the band goes on with the click of a clasp. I looked down at my forearms where the freckles make patterns I have memorized and saw faintly the bruising of a seatbelt in the wrong place. I saw the powdering that airbag fabric leaves like chalk. I saw a few strands of blonde webbed to my jacket sleeve that were not mine, and understood that I had not gotten those at work. I had not left work completely at all. When the first siren finally threaded through the night, I could not say how long I had been standing in the median. Red and blue painted the grass with a different pulse. A real patrol car pulled up, and this one opened and released a trooper who had the look all troopers have, the combination of weary and sharp like a knife left out overnight. He took in the scene and asked me if I was all right. I said yes, because that is what we say when the answer is a complicated wound. He moved to the SUV and peered inside and called to see if anyone responded. I watched his breath show and vanish. He radioed and said no occupant, no blood to speak of, no obvious sign of ejection. He asked me when I had arrived. I told him 2:04, and he did not glance at my dash to see that the clock had never advanced. He said someone had called this in 20 minutes ago. I said I had called, and he nodded the way officers nod when you are a strange person on the side of a road near a changing thing. He asked me my name for the report. I told him and waited for something to break. He wrote it down and did not look up at the bracelets in my hands. The ambulance came. 2 medics I did not know moved like choreography around the vehicle, doing the things we do on instinct in case the universe has left one corner untucked and we can pull it back over the bed. One of them glanced at me and then a longer glance, probably recognizing me from a shift change, a hallway, a code where you trade equipment by feel. He said I looked pale, and I told him he should see me after 3 doubles. He smiled because gallows humor is the only thing we have that does not cost money. They packed up again because there was no one to pack. The trooper asked if I wanted to sit in his cruiser while he finished his notes. I said no and leaned on my car and felt the metal cool. The hazard blinkers on the SUV slowed and then stopped. The night rearranged itself to be ordinary. Out over the marshes, a line of lights marked a plane cutting toward Hobby or away from it. The train's last horn receded into a memory it had always been. When I finally drove on, the sign for exit 751 fell behind and did not recur. The bar on my phone found signal and then bars. The radio caught a station where a voice promised weather and farm reports and songs about men who do not always deserve the women who wait for them. I passed a Buc-ee's billboard and then another. I pulled into a gas station where a man in a hoodie moved 40s from a hand truck to a cooler and did not look up. I went into the bright bathroom and washed my hands 3 times and still could not release the faint smell of antifreeze. I laid the bracelets on the sink and watched the water run around them like a small river around stones. I drove home on county roads through stands of live oak and low neighborhoods with yard lights that make circles like small moons. I parked and turned off the engine and listened to its clicks. The sky was graying at the edges. Birds began in the oleander and then stopped and then started again as if embarrassed. I took the bracelets inside and set them on my kitchen table. They lay there with their ink already softening, their numbers already thinking about blurring. I sat with them until the light made everything honest. At 7, I showered and put on clean scrubs and left for my next shift. I slid the bracelets into my pocket because sometimes you bring your homework to the place where you can ask for help. The highway looked new and false in daylight. I took the same path, I passed the same markers, I breathed the same air, and nothing caught me. The median where the SUV had been was a strip of roughed grass. A set of skid marks that did not exist in the dark appeared in the day, faint as a sketch. I kept going. At the hospital, the automatic doors breathed open. The charge nurse looked up and grinned the way you grin at someone you want to put back into the flow. I went to the locker room and changed my shoes and tucked the bracelets deeper into my pocket and told myself they were plastic and story. We got a radio call 30 minutes into the shift. MVC on the interstate, single vehicle rollover near exit 751. Infant occupant extricated by passerby prior to EMS arrival. No injuries noted on scene. Mother unaccounted for. I looked at the clock and at the doors and at the hall with its blown-out lights and tile that has seen enough tears to be debt-free. The words rattled my chest and settled there like coins. I moved with the others to prepare a room that would smell like warmed blanket and adhesive for electrodes. I rounded the crib. I placed a tiny pulse ox on a tray. I never once said out loud that numbers can repeat without being the same. That sometimes you are given a rehearsed line and you have to find a new inflection. I only went to the sink and washed my hands and then again. In my pocket, the bracelets flexed and returned to shape, the way plastic does, the way people do. If there is an ending, it is not the kind with a lesson that makes sleep easier. There is a highway that fishtails through saltgrass and refinery air and repeats an exit until you learn to stop. There is a night you leave work with someone's fear dried on your sleeve and a bruise across your chest where something tried to restrain you. There is a vehicle upside down like a beetle showing its honest belly, and inside the impression of warmth where a child was and is and will be driven home by someone whose name is not yours and is. There is a bracelet stamped with the way the world categorizes us and another with the way we categorize ourselves. I carry them because carrying things is sometimes the only medicine. I pass exit 751 in daylight and in darkness and in the split seconds in between. Some nights the sign does not return. Some nights it does. Either way, I keep my hands on the wheel and my eyes open. Either way, I am driving home. I worked the graveyard from a low cinder block studio off Highway 59, north of Cleveland, where the pine line starts to thicken and the air holds that steady resin smell that gets into your clothes. We sat in a strip of night businesses that looked closed even when the lights were on. The station manager called the place Sam Houston Pines Radio because he liked branding. You could point at through a windshield. A bright green sign with a pine silhouette and the frequency on it. A promise that through all that dark miles of timber, we would keep you company from Livingston to New Caney. From Shepherd to Cold Spring, out past the Trinity River bottoms and across to the far edges of the big thicket, the transmitter stood on its own clearing 2 miles down a dirt road. Guy wires singing when the wind pushed up from the river. At night, the tower strobed red and the deer grazed around the chain-link fence like they were lit by a heartbeat. Friday nights were for requests, and I kept it clean because of the hour. A lot of truckers, a lot of third shifters from the plants, late-night nurses from Conroe calling in to ask for something to keep them awake, men with a lot on their mind easing down 105 where the forest folds over you, and the road feels like a runnel carved in evergreen. I had been doing it long enough that I recognized voices by the way they breathed before they spoke. You get used to hearing people when they are alone with their dashboard light. I tried to be kind. I tried not to let the studio's loneliness climb into my throat. That night the wind carried a whistle through the pines. I could hear it even with the headphones on, leaking through the seal at my jaw, a wire hum that harmonized with the fluorescent buzz above the console. I had just back announced a set and was about to go to weather when Line 4 lit up. Line 4 had a little mask of tape over its button with a handwritten note from before my time. Do not use. The station survived on patches in memory, and lines had been rerun and unrun so many times that the punch-down block in the rack looked like someone had braided a rug out of copper. We only took calls on lines 1 and 2. Line 3 went to the business office voicemail. Line 4, I'd been told, was an old remote line that never got properly removed, a relic from when we ran high school football from the field. That was what I'd been told, but I had put my hand on the taped button more than a few times just to feel the gummy edge under my fingertip, the way you might worry a loose tooth. The light for 4 glowed steady. I looked through the window at the parking lot outside. My car sat by itself under a sodium lamp. A moth battered at the glass. Somewhere beyond the asphalt, a siren cried and then fell away like somebody had put a hand over it. The song had 2 minutes left. I put the caller on hold without speaking and finished my on-air business, then brought the fader down and muted the studio. When I answered for, the line was cold enough to make a hiss. I said the station name and gave my name in the smooth way I had practiced the first year, until it felt like the real introduction and not a costume. Thank God, a man said. You're there. I pictured him as a welder with the dark hood pushed up, or maybe a foreman sitting in his truck, thermos open, the light off so the mosquitoes would ignore him. His voice had that sawdust fatigue in it, and he was driving something that rattled. The background sound cut in and out like wind past a wire grill. Who am I speaking with? I asked. George, he said fast and then slower, like he wanted it to be true. I go by George. What can I play for you tonight, George? He swallowed. I heard it. Can you call someone for me instead? I can't get anyone. My battery is dying. I'm not supposed to be here. I had been asked to do stranger things. Are you hurt? No, he said. I don't think so. I can't feel my legs, but I walked here. That doesn't sound right when I say it. Where is here, George? Says Sam Houston Forest on the wooden sign, he said. Big letters burned in. Took the road at the mile marker with the bullet holes. There's a gate up here. I shouldn't have come through it. Static breathed in my headphones like the ocean. What number are you calling from? If we get disconnected, I can call you back. It's the radio, he said. I turned it to you. I kept turning, and there you were, and now you're also in the phone. I know how that sounds. What's the nearest highway, George? 59, he said, and then he went quiet. Then he said, no, the old one. The one where the little stores lined up like teeth. I keep thinking about the stores. Please just call my daughter. Tell her I'm sorry for leaving the way I did. The song ended on the other fader, and a dead second blinked at me on the clock. I potted up a station ID and swung into a long overnight track to cover myself. I took down a name and a number, wrote it on a sticky note I stuck to my wrist because the console was too slick, and asked if he could tell me what he saw. I trained at a place where they taught us to keep people talking, to look for details, landmarks, sounds you can triangulate. One act of kindness for a voice flattening out on the other end of a line in the middle of the kind of night that eats men whole. He described dark trunks, a single red light to the south, a smell like metal changing temperature. He said he could hear something that wasn't wind. It sounded like a song a little girl might sing to keep herself brave. Then the line went to a dial tone so sudden it made my ears ring. The light on 4 kept burning red as if nobody had hung up. I took myself off the air with a tight break and called the county dispatcher. The operator, a woman with a voice that sat somewhere between weary and alert, asked me if I had a number. I read her what George gave me. There was a long pause. She asked me to read it again, so I did, certain I had miswritten it, hating how the note had wrinkled against my skin and now showed an ink puddle where a 2 might be a 7. She told me to hold on. The line clicked. When she came back, she sounded like she was trying on a tone that fit bad. That's not an active number, she said. It comes back to a line that was taken out of service in 2004 after storm damage. You said he's in the forest. Do you have any other information? I can see where my tower is on the map, I said, and hated how it made me sound like a boy showing off his marble. Our transmitter logs calls from the request lines for contests for legal reasons. It probably caught this one. It might have a location. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a prank. He sounded wrong, though. We can send a unit to drive the forest roads, she said. It will be somebody with a lot of ground to cover. You don't go looking. You stay where you are, I promised. I meant it when I said it. She asked for our tower's call log data for the last hour, and I told her I would email it over between songs. I had never touched the log tool for anything but recounting winter calls, but the interface was simple, like old farm equipment is simple. There was a metal box under the counter with a small screen and a keypad that let you pull a print of the last 50 call records. I punched the codes. A long strip of heat paper spilled out warm on my palm. The call to line 4 printed with a timestamp and a string of digits under an entry labeled route. Another entry read source with a set of coordinates. The coordinates sat clean and calm on the paper and made my stomach dimple down with a feeling I can only compare to standing on a high ladder and looking straight down through the center of it. The source showed the middle of the Sam Houston National Forest where there weren't roads, just the Lone Star hiking trail threading through like something left by a needle in a moving hand. I emailed the photo of the strip to the address the dispatcher gave me. She answered with a thumbs up that felt wrong for the situation. I went back to the board and spoke into the mic with my easy velvet maintenance voice like nothing was changed. Song, weather, a local ad for a place that fixed small engines in Shepherd, a promo for the Saturday morning fishing show. I kept looking at line 4. It stayed lit, steady as a bad idea. An hour later, it rang again without ringing. The light went from steady to brighter, then back. I picked it up on the first blink. Sam Houston Pines, I said. You've got me. Someone's breaths counted in my ear. The line had a hollow to it now, like the other end opened onto a big space inside a bigger one. A child spoke. Not a toddler. An 8-year-old 9, maybe. The age where the breath sits high and words come out careful. Do you do birthday shout-outs, she asked. If I tell you the name, will you say it? I can, I said. What's your name? My brother says not to say it out loud, she said. There's a man in the trees that likes names. He puts them in his pocket. When he passes by, they whisper, don't say your name out loud. My daddy said the man is not real. He said the only men in the trees are tired, but then he got tired too and lay down. And he's not up again. Where are you? In the metal, she said, and tapped something. And the hollow boomed as if she were inside a drum. There's a ladder, but it's too far. The door won't open. We can see red through the cracks. My brother says to wait for morning because morning means roads. What's your brother's name? A pause. His name is not for that man, she said softly, like a spell. Can you make it so the truck with the yellow lights keeps coming closer? It turned around once and we were almost ready to run, but he went the other way and he did not hear us. He should be careful because the road is not where it was before. I felt the same little drop in my stomach. I asked her what song she wanted and she said the first one her mother ever sang to her when she was sick, but she didn't remember the name, only the rhythm. She hummed 3 thin bars of something that might have been a hymn or a lullaby. Then the line went to the sudden dial tone again. The light stayed on. I ran a PSA about not texting and driving and let my voice steady as it talked. I did not have a family to call out of bed. The woman I had lived with for a bit found another bed with a man who didn't smell like stale coffee and ozone. The station manager lived up in Livingston and would be asleep and would ask the next day in his big genial voice why I hadn't simply turned off line 4. If a thing is taped over, it's taped over for a reason, he would say, as if we were both children who had been caught taking a board out of a fence to crawl under it. I refreshed my email. The dispatcher had sent 2 lines. Units are checking access roads and trailheads. If you receive further calls with location details, please advise. Line 4 brightened again. I answered and the sound on the other end had changed. There was a chorus to it. Fragments of words like the little voices that ride the edge of a crowd in a stadium. A woman spoke and the first syllable broke into a cough. Not a sick cough. That cough people use when they want to restart everything inside their chest. Is Ray there? She asked, as if I were someone else. Please tell Ray I didn't mean to leave him. Please tell him the bridge wasn't there, and then it was, and then it wasn't, and the road made a corner that the map didn't. I have to hang up now before the red light goes away. What red light? I asked. The heartbeat, she said, and hung up. I punched the print key on the call logger as if hitting it enough might make the paper tell me a better truth. The new calls had the same source coordinates within a few seconds of the first. The root string under line 4 stayed strange. A ghost of copper. I tried calling the number I had written on my wrist and listened to a recording inform me that the line had been disconnected. The voice of a pleasant woman who told me 80 different ways that we were sorry for the inconvenience, each one like a little paper blanket you could try to pull over your knees out of politeness. The air in the studio thickened until I opened the back door to let in a slice of pine air. I stood in that door with the cables I should have tidied coiled at my feet and listened to the tower sing. It happens on nights when the wind runs at a certain angle to the wires. If you stand with your head tipped just right, you can hear it as music. A high ghostly chord that seems to come from the black between the trees. The red beacon on the tower pulsed against the sky. The deer nosed at the grass. Farther off, an engine droned and then went quiet in a way that sounded like a decision, not a failure. When I went back in, the air smelled faintly like hot metal and old paper. Line 4 didn't wait for me to reach the chair. It brightened as if it had been watching my hand. I didn't say the station name. I said, "Tell me what you can see." "Nothing," a man said. His voice was low and careful, like someone trying not to wake a child in the next room. "I can smell water. It has that smell like a hose that sat out in summer. My ankles are cold. There's a humming. You should tell people to keep your station on when they drive. It's like a string." The words landed on a part of my brain that had been quiet for years. My father kept talk radio on in the garage because he said he worked better if somebody told him what the world was doing in the background. He would draw straight lines on board edges with a pencil and say the line only looked straight because your eyes wanted it to. He said you had to measure. He died up in Amarillo, a heart that forgot itself in his sleep. I thought of him with his little battery radio the week the hurricane chased us north and the lights went out for days. How the voices in the speaker made the dark smaller. "You keep the radio on like a string." "I'm going to stay right here," I said. "I'll keep talking." "I can hear you," the man said. "Not just in here. It's like a penny in the mouth, but better. Do you ever say your name on the radio because I think I should remember it?" I didn't give it, not because of a man in the trees. because it felt suddenly like something you don't hand out when the dark asks. "I'll play you a song that sounds like a road," I said. "Thank you," he said. "If I go, I'll leave this open." The line went quiet but not disconnected. The light stayed on. Near 2 in the morning, between spots and weather, I took the printouts and drove to the transmitter. I know I said I promised. The thing about promises is they sometimes belong to the person who made them until they don't. I set the board to run a pre-programmed hour, the kind we cut for holidays, and I slipped my cell in my pocket, grabbed a flashlight and a set of keys in case the gate locked behind me, and drove the dirt road with that low red tower light beating at the end like a heart in a jar. The clearing was a bowl scooped out of the trees. The ground was tamped and the grass short, and the guy anchors looked like fists pushed into the dirt. The chain link around the base made a box with a locked gate. The amplifier shed sat to one side with its little air conditioner rattling. Night pressed all around. The red beacon hit the trunks and slid off. I rolled my window down and the hum of the guy wires resolved into something like one voice held long and unbroken, while another answered it from farther back in the trees. I had done this drive before when lightning tripped a breaker, or when the feeder line brought us down and you had to match your radio to the other world and start talking the second the power came back so listeners wouldn't punch out. I had never come and sat with the engine off. I did that now and let my eyes adjust. The metal tasted in the air like the little girl said. When the wind moved, the wires sang and the pines answered. I knew better than to walk under the guy lines. The stories weren't ghost stories. A man walked into one while hizing a deer and the wire cut through him like he was a loaf of bread. That was how the station manager told it. And even if he said it with a laugh because he could not stand the quiet end of sentences, the caution was good. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained a photo. For a second I thought somebody had sent me a picture from a bar and I would get a wrong number apology after. But the image that opened was a map tile with a pin dropped in the green. The latitude and longitude matched the printout I had folded into my pocket. Before I could type back, a second photo arrived, blurrier, as if the sender's hand shook. It was the tower from a distance, the red light a bleeding dot above a line of black trees. There was something in the foreground that looked like the edge of a corrugated metal wall, and a rim of frozen water glazed with pine needles. I typed, "Who is this?" and hit send. The little dots of an incoming type came back and then went away and then returned and then vanished. Nobody answered, but Lean 4 lit on the dash of my console inside my head. I had left it on speaker in the studio because if it rang again in that empty room, I didn't want to hear it bounce off the corkboard and make a room out of what was supposed to be a little square. I got out of the car and stood in the clearing with my hands on my thighs like a man who has been asked to take a position and hold it. In the forest, the places you know in daylight become new rooms and you think you're the first person to stand there every time. The tower groaned once like a ship turning on its axis at sea, and then a different sound arrived, a wet slap and a fast breathing. I lifted my light without meaning to. The beam caught a fox's eyes low and then higher up caught something else that did not have eyes the way an animal has them. It was a reflection, a mute lens staring back. My heart tried to stack beats and failed. The thing moved and my mind scissored it into pieces to make it fit into what it knew. It was a child's plastic raincoat, slick with water hanging on rebar. The reflection belonged to the round of a dangling flashlight's lens. I steadied and there was no child. I don't know what I intended to do next. Call the dispatcher and tell her I had disobeyed. Drive back and resume my voice. Walk into the black and keep walking. Any of these. A smell like a struck match came through the clearing. The hairs on my arm rose before I understood that the guy wire nearest me had begun to vibrate in a way that wasn't wind. I could hear it through my jaw as I turned my head. The hum thickened and in it rode words like bubbles in syrup. I leaned my head to the wire and placed my palm near it but not touching. Because you do not touch a line like that, you can die from what you cannot see. The words in the hum organized themselves into a single thing. We're here, it said. We've been here. I don't believe in messages encoded in physics. I believe in equipment that leaks signals and air that plays tricks. I believe in human loneliness generating patterns out of noise. But the thing that happened then quelled the throb of my temple in a way that had nothing to do with belief. The hum broke into distinct syllables and a voice I knew said my name. It was my father's voice, the timbre of it, the little lift at the end he used when he needed me to give him certainty he couldn't afford to ask for directly. It said my name and then said, Turn around, in that patient way he had when he taught me to back a trailer without jackknifing it across the lawn. I turned as if someone had pulled my shoulders on a string. The light found the base of the tower, the gate to the chain link enclosure. The lock hung open. I hadn't noticed it a minute before, or it had not been true a minute before, and I don't know which of those is worse. The gate had been wired shut since before my time, keys kept in a box in a desk whose drawers stuck in summer. The lock's crook showed a smear of some pale residue. It could have been sap. It could have been frost. I walked. The fence posts had little cups welded to their tops to keep water out, and each cup held a dark coin of rain. My light skated over them and made little eyes. I pushed through the gate and felt a kind of coming home I would later pretend I had not felt. Under the tower, the world sounded bigger. The legs rose into the dark. Cable ran into conduits and conduits into the shed with its constant hum. In the center of the triangle formed by the three legs sat a round concrete pad with a square metal hatch set into it. The hatch had not been there last time I came. It sat flush, rust powdering its corners like paprika. Someone had scratched 3 letters into it with a nail. RLY. The little girl's voice in my head said, "I'm in the metal." My father's voice said nothing. The man in the trees, if he existed, had stopped walking. I felt suddenly stupid and young and old at the same time. I knelt to the hatch. The ring for lifting it lay flat. I slid my fingers into the slot and pulled. The metal came up reluctant and then easy, the way a mouth opens when it stops pretending it wants to resist. Cold air breathed out, wet and iron. A ladder raked the side of a round shaft. The flashlight showed ribs of concrete, a rust stripe down one side where water had bled. I put my head past the opening and heard a sound that wasn't the wire song. It was a radio. It was me 20 seconds delayed saying there's patchy fog out toward Cold Spring, and if you're southbound on 59, there's a downed limb in the right lane near the Trinity crossing. The sensible part of me, a thin thing, said to close the hatch and drive back and call the dispatcher and report vandalism and trespass, and the fact that my station was bleeding into a hole in the ground. The other part, the part that lifts when you drive a long black line through pines and see a light you can't explain and your hands turn without thinking, put one foot onto the ladder. Below, a light burned, the wrong kind for a space like this, warmer and yellower than the cold white work lights in utility spaces. I felt like a moth drawn to a porch I had not seen lit in years. I climbed down. The ladder rungs were damp and my hand tightened until my palm creaked. 20 feet, 30, I don't know. I counted and then lost count when a drip hit my neck and ran a cold finger down my spine. At the bottom, there was a round room with a low ceiling and a metal bench bolted to the wall. On the bench sat a device that might have been built out of a ham radio and pieces of kitchen equipment, a metal face with dials and a handset and a window where a red line crawled across a paper strip. The handset sat in its cradle, and yet I could hear my broadcast coming from nowhere in particular, softened and chambered by the round walls. There was another doorway. I did not go through it. On the wall above the bench, someone had taped photos on top of older photos, layers of damp paper curling at the edges like bark. The top layer showed things from the Pine Belt over the years. Boys in leather jackets holding a trophy, a church picnic under the trees, a truck with a bed full of watermelons, a woman who had found a fish big enough to have its picture taken with her. Under them, where the edges pulled up, I saw parts of other pictures, snapshots with colors the sun had almost drunk, orange shoulders and brown sky, and the kind of smiles people do not remember making, even when they hold the snapshot later and try to tell their children who is who. On the metal face of the device, an engraved plate read Emergency Patch Unit. The letters had the earnest square look of federal signage from 50 years ago. My phone vibrated on my hip. The screen said unknown again. I answered, and the voice that came through was my own saying my name like it was testing a microphone. There was a moving sound behind it, the muffled roller coaster rush of the trees when they fill with wind and each needle sings against another. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately and my father's voice said, "Turn around," and the little girl said, "Do not say your name." And the man who went by George said he wasn't supposed to be here. I set the phone down next to the metal device like I could lay a fever on a cool surface and let it bleed out. The device clicked and the red line on the paper jumped. I could have left then. I could have carried the stack of printouts and the photos back up and handed them to the woman at dispatch, like a child bringing a shell to a parent, saying, "Look what the ocean made." There is always a place where the path forks and one fork leads you back to a lunch you will eat in a place that has windows and a sound like other people doing daytime things. And the other fork leads where maps grow indecisive. The trouble is that in the forest at night, the fork is not visible until you have already taken it. Something moved in the other doorway. It was not a shadow. Shadows are honest. They belong to things. This was a change in the air, a pressure that made my ears plug for a second and then pop. It made the room feel bigger without any wall stepping back. My light found the doorway and stopped on its threshold. I could see only a slice of corridor, another set of conduits, a crossing of pipes, and a rag tied to one of them as if someone had put it there to remember which way to go. The rag had cartoon ducks on it in faded blue. I had owned a towel with that pattern when I was little. The rational part of me said that pattern existed on a million towels. The irrational part said my mother had thrown that towel away after it tore, and yet here it was. My hand rested on the handset of the emergency patch unit, and without meaning to, I lifted it. "Sam Houston Pines," I said. Out of reflex and terror and habit, the words braided into a rope I could throw. There were answers. All at once and then each alone. "You don't have to take my word for the order." It might have been the reverse. A voice like mine said I'm at the tower, and it sounded like a man overhearing his future in a diner. A woman I had never met said my name in the slow way people say a list under their breath, because they can't afford to forget. A man with a rattle in his throat said he could smell water. A child hummed 3 bars of a song without a name. Somewhere above, the red beacon pulsed through the skin of the world, and the guy wires sang like high strings. I stayed until dawn, because leaving before felt like stepping out of a story and into a smaller one where everything you cared about had put on masks. The room grew lighter by degrees when the hatch above bled a milk color into the shaft. When I climbed up, my muscles shook from a fear they decided to call fatigue so I could keep moving. The clearing had that too clean look of early day. The deer had fled. The red light went out. Birds took the air back. The lock on the gate was closed and rusty, not the one I had seen open. If anyone saw me, they would say I was a man in my work shirt standing under a radio tower, holding a paper strip with numbers on it and a phone that lit every minute with a call from a number that said unknown, and my name spooling out on the first syllable like thread. At 9, the dispatcher called and told me they had sent 2 vehicles around the forest roads. They had walked trailheads and found nothing. She asked if anything new had come in, and I told her I had received additional calls with no clear identifiers. I did not mention the ladder or the device or the way the guy wires had sung a name into my bones. She said to contact them immediately if anything changed and to keep the logs. I told her I would. After, I sat in the studio and stared at line 4. Somebody had torn the tape off and thrown it away. I don't remember doing that. The glue left a pale square like a missing picture in a sun-faded gallery. The day manager arrived midday with breakfast tacos and asked why I looked like I had slept in the trunk. I said I chased a noise in the transmitter yard. He told a story about a raccoon that ate through the foam around a conduit last spring and made the whole county sound like someone was shaking a cereal box. He laughed at his own story. I laughed too, because adults laugh when the moment says to, or the moment gets impatient and leaves you behind. He went to his office and I stayed with the board, ran songs, tried not to tilt the mic toward the hole in me. That night the calls resumed. Some were ordinary, voices with the soft exhaustion of men and women alone with their dash. Some came on 4, and those were the ones where names were careful things and roads were moved and red light was heartbeat. The logs kept printing with the same coordinates. The dispatcher's emails got less frequent and then stopped. On Sunday, a man walked into the station in a ball cap like a uniform and a badge under his shirt and asked if I could show him the call logs. He had a gentle face, sun-lined. I gave him the strips of paper and he took photos with care like a person handling pictures of a wedding where he had not known he was a guest. He stood for a long time with his hands on his hips like all of this was his yard after a storm, and then he said they'd log it and keep an eye out. He said the forest keeps what it keeps. He asked me not to go to the tower at night, and the way he said it made me feel seen and small and also cared for. I promised him. I meant it when I said it. At 2 the next morning I was back under the red pulse, standing with my head tilted to the wire like a man listening for trains on a coin rail. I thought then maybe I could thread the string. I started the show each night with the clearest music I could find, songs with lines that roll and keep rolling, and on the break I described the roads, not the ones on the map, but the way they felt in the dark. where 223 tracks low and wet by the river, where 1725 runs straight as a drawn breath all the way to the first blinking light, where the old highway hides behind the fake frontage like a secret you can still choose. I spoke about the smell of creosote on hot wood bridges and the way a culvert makes water speak even in a drought. I read the lost dog report like a prayer. I did not say names unless a caller said their own. I did not say mine. The calls came, and sometimes I could align a voice with a truck that passed the studio, lights high, a CB antenna whip bowing, and sometimes not. When the little girl sang, I hummed back what I remembered. And that night another voice farther away took the melody and carried it, and I knew something had been handed across a space where nothing should travel. Tell me the truth, the older part of you says. The part that refuses a magic trick even as the handkerchief becomes a dove. Did anyone get rescued? Did anyone come out of the trees? I wish it. I drove every road that led to a trailhead in the next weeks. I left bottled water at gates with notes that said, "Take what you need," written in big letters because sometimes you forget how to read when you are scared. I called the number on my wrist until the recording wore into my ear like a groove. I learned that a line can be disconnected and still remember its own shape. That cables hold voices the way a river keeps the taste of the towns it passes through. That a tower can sing names to itself all night and never run out. Here's the part I kept for last because it sits at the end of every road and I would rather keep you on the line. The last weekend of August, a storm came across the Trinity with a straight-line wind that pressed the pines until they bowed and broke. I went on air early because when the lights go out, people go to the dial, and when they reach a voice that says what the wind is doing, they stay. Trees fell across 59. Traffic halted, men in county trucks moved from one problem to the next. The red beacon beat like a wound. I stayed with it. Near 3 in the morning, a call blazed onto 4. The sound on the line hit my head like a hand. It was me, not a recording, not a reflection. It was me from a place with a little echo, saying the words I say when I have to leave the board for a second, the patter I use to disguise the leaving. I spoke over myself and the two voices braided and then parted and then one said my name. It was the voice from The Wire, the one that had my father's lift on the end of sentences, and it said kindly, "Turn around." I did. The studio window gave me the parking lot lit by a flickering lamp. Beyond that was the black seam where the pines hem the world. The red blink rose. Between the strokes of red, when the dark is complete and the eye floats in a salt sea looking for anything, I saw a square of a lighter black, a hatch square sliding. A shape rose, a man with a light in his hand. He carried it low like someone who remembers that lights draw eyes. He walked to the fence and stopped. He looked at the tower as if listening, and then at the station as if counting how far he had to go. He put the light in his mouth to free his hands, and he pulled something from his pocket and held it up. It shone a moment with the reflected red. It was a key. He set it gently on the ground and backed away with care, hands up like he was leaving a dog a treat and did not want to spook it. Then the red light passed and the square of black found him, and he was not there. After the storm, the county replaced the fence around the tower, and with it came a new lock and a survey done by men who moved in pairs and used words like liability. The emergency patch unit, if it ever existed, exists only in the way something breathed into your ear at night exists. The hatch is not there when the sun is high, only 3 concrete pads and a hum. But when the air goes heavy and the trees sing, when a truck turns down a road that used to be another road and a man with a thermos and a tired heart tunes past static until a voice finds him, the line lights. If I lift it, my mouth remembers the words that bring me to myself. I say Sam Houston Pines Radio, and I give the weather and I ask what you see. Sometimes someone answers from a place that has no name and asks me to say theirs. And sometimes they ask me not to, and when they do, I don't. Because there are men in the trees who like names and pockets full of whispering. I keep the string tight for as long as the red heart beats. When it stops, I let the quiet sit on the console like a visitor, and then I fill it again with a song with a road in it. If you drive up this way after midnight, and your headlights catch the green sign with the pine silhouette, if you put your hand on the dial and the air tastes like metal in summer and you feel like you're being led somewhere, you can almost imagine from when you were small. Keep going until the trees part. If you call and no one answers on 1 or 2, don't say your name. If a child hums a tune you do not know, you can hum anyway. If you hear your own voice say turn around, do it gently, as if the world were balanced on your shoulder blades and might spill. If you see a square of black where it should not be, you did not see it. If you find a key, leave it. There is a man down there who goes by George. And a woman who missed a bridge that wasn't there, and a brother who won't let you say his name aloud. There is a red light that is a heartbeat. There is a wire that sings as if it remembers you. I will be here until I am not, asking what you see, telling you there is patchy fog toward Cold Spring, and limbs across both lanes at the Trinity Crossing, and a curve that moved last year near the old frontage. And if you are tired, pull over. There's a gas station with a stubborn pump at Shepherd and a clerk who will pretend not to worry about you. If I ever call you from a number that says unknown, forgive me for keeping you awake and for making you listen to your own voice come back. Delayed from a place where roads are strings and towers hum, and names must be carried like a cup brimming. I will be trying to keep you on the right side of the dark. I will be describing the path as if by speaking it I can set it back where it used to be. And if one night I stop and the gap goes on longer than a weather break should, do not wait on the line. Keep driving until the trees end. When they do not, remember the song. Humming is a kind of light. It goes farther than you think. They trained us to trust our eyes second and the readouts first. Human eyes see what they want. The instruments, if they're calibrated and you've checked the dates on the stickers, don't care about your nerves. That's what I kept telling myself on the second night of the fog, when the mist off the river had crawled up the low country and settled like a blanket over US 277, a damp white that ate the cones of our headlights and beaded on our jackets until it ran off the cuffs like sweat. The checkpoint wasn't much to look at in daylight. Just a pull-off choke point with aluminum trailers, floodlights on short poles, the stop sign and the advance warning signs half a mile back, the generator thudding like a slow heartbeat from the gravel berm. At night, the floodlights turned the fog into pearl, and the road beyond the cones looked like a hallway without a floor. I was on primary that hour, which meant my hand went up and down and I said the same words in the same calm voice, while the K9 unit idled by the barricades, and the thermal scope sat high on its pole, clicking through frames. Agent Maria Alvarado handled the tablet. Agent Sandoval babysat the generator. Every few minutes, a rig or a sedan softened into view, and I'd wave them into the lane, check the plates, ask the day of questions. We're not far from Del Rio there, close enough that you see the stars bend around Laughlin's night sorties and hear the drag off the river when the wind is wrong. You can taste caliche in your teeth out there, that chalky grit that never quite leaves. I'd worked the checkpoint enough times that the trash cans felt like furniture. Even the little things had a pattern. The moths came for the lights in drifts. The radios had a dead spot between two of the reflectors. Sometimes you could tell a trucker was about to blow past before he appeared, by the way the fog trembled ahead of the engine brake. The minivan entered our world as a smear of darker gray. I held my hand up and the beams dropped as the driver eased off. The engine sounded tired, a wet cough under the hood. It rolled to a stop directly under the thermal, and I watched the tablet expecting the usual bright cutout blooms where bodies sit, heads and shoulders, that glow that tells you warm, living people are inside. The feed showed a rectangle of metal with 4 black voids where the tires met the asphalt. No body heat, no engine heat either. The van was a hole in the screen, the kind of thing you see when someone bumps the camera and smears the sensor with a thumb. I tapped the scope housing out of habit and heard the soft whir as it adjusted and fixed focus. Still nothing. Maria glanced at me and then at the driver's window. Her eyebrows made a question. I stepped forward and rapped my knuckles on the glass. The driver rolled it down with the slow grind of a tired motor. He was an older man with a beard that had gone salt white, a face that had learned how to fold into a smile. The fog left drops clinging to the hairs on his cheek. He had both hands at 10 and 2 and his license already out, as if he'd been to 100 of these and wanted to be respectful. When he breathed, I could see the cloud of it, not because of cold, but because the air was saturated. "Evening, sir," I said. "Where are you headed tonight?" He turned his head toward me as if he'd been listening for his cue. "East," he said. "San Angelo. Visiting my sister." It came out steady, kind. He didn't blink much. He didn't smell like alcohol. Didn't look spun out. The van had kids' stickers on the back windows, sun-faded stars, and a cartoon coyote with a speech bubble missing its words. "Anyone else in the vehicle with you tonight?" "No, sir, just me." His voice had that built-in politeness you hear in men who once had uniforms of their own. I looked past him into the cabin. The dome light came on when he opened the glove box for his registration, and I saw the neat line of empty seats, crumbs on the carpet, a beaded rosary looped around the rearview mirror, and a little card of the Sacred Heart taped near the radio. No movement, no stray breathing, no fog of breath inside. Just the man and me and the slow, damp drum of the idling generator. Plate and registration matched. His name was Camilo Reyes. The plate was from Tom Green County. No warrants, no flags, nothing for me to hang a bad feeling on. I handed his license back. The thermal still showed a silent rectangle. Maria caught my eye and touched the edge of the screen with a fingernail. An unspoken, "This is wrong. I made the small decision you make when your gut and your training disagree. And I let the small decision win." I nodded, stepped back, and waved him through. He thanked me with his chin and eased forward. The tire crunch sounded normal. The fog swallowed him one car length past the cones. 5 minutes later, Sandoval, who could usually be trusted to talk only when it was worth the oxygen, said over my shoulder that the pavement was wet. It wasn't raining. The fog will do that. It condenses and drips. But when I looked, I saw a line of prints leading off the shoulder. The shape of bare feet laid down in parallel, heel to toe, as if a small crowd had stepped through a shallow puddle and then walked away into the brush. They were fresh enough to shine under the floodlights. They went past the cones and through the gap in the cable fence and into the flat of caliche beyond. The white, hard pan that looks like someone poured milk and let it dry. We saw prints sometimes. People tried strange routes and strange weather. What made me swallow was the way the line started directly behind the minivan's last position. And how many there were. Not 2, not 4. A lot. We went out there with flashlights and our boots made their own marks over the top of them, and I hated that. Scuffing out something I might want back. The prints were the size you would expect from children and adults both. Some showed splayed toes as if the owner had stumbled. A few were so small I could cover them with my palm. They weren't crisp, but they were intentional. The kind you get when skin meets damp and leaves an honest outline. We followed them 20 yards until the caliche rose into a low lip and broke into brush. A mix of prickly pear, cedar, huisache, and mesquite in all the shapes that look like people when you've been awake too long. And there, 10 feet into that tangle, the print stopped. There were broken twigs and a dampness on the leaves as if someone had passed through and shaken the fog down. But nothing to read. No continuation of the trail on the other side. No indentations in the sandy patches. The caliche sat quiet behind us with our boot tracks, and in front of us the brush made itself innocent. We documented. We took pictures. Maria said the word anomalous into the mic, which is the safe word for we don't know. Dispatch asked if we required support. I said negative, supervisory to advise in the morning. The radio coughed and cleared and went back to the dead spot hum. The hours put themselves back into rows. Sometime near midnight we heard a voice over Channel 2 that wasn't ours. The net stayed quiet most nights except for check-ins and the occasional chase in a different sector that bled through. What we heard came in soft and soaked with static like cloth left out in the dew. 1535, said the voice. 1535, copy. We all looked at our watches at once like school kids. Maria's read 1212. Sandoval stared up at the fog as if it had new lines in it. I asked Channel 2 to repeat. The voice did not repeat us. It kept talking to itself, calm, professional, old. The way you hear on recordings from the 90s. The unit numbers weren't ours. They weren't even in the correct format. When the second minivan arrived, it came from the same gray hallway, same halting engine. I would swear under oath that the sticker on the left side of the back window had the same cartoon coyote, only less faded. I would swear the rosary thread was the same color blue. The plate was Tom Green County again, but this time the numbers were one off, as if someone had rolled the dial and asked us to pretend it had always been that way. The driver was younger, but with the same bones and the same warmth in the eyes. Name was Reyes again, this time Daniel. He had a suitcase in the back and a leather jacket folded on the passenger seat. The thermal showed nothing. I could feel Maria's breath at my shoulder without seeing her. I did the dance, I asked the questions, and when he smiled the way the older man had smiled, I felt a muscle in my throat try to lock. Where are you headed tonight? East, San Angelo, visiting my dad, he said. He tapped the steering wheel with one finger like he was ticking a metronome only he could hear. When he pulled his wallet, there was a photograph tucked behind the clear plastic. I couldn't see the details, only a shape that looked like a church and a little girl in a white dress with sunlight in her hair. I didn't wave him through. I asked him to put it in park and step out. My palm felt slick inside the nitrile glove. He complied without a word. When he opened the door, I expected the slosh of warmer air or the refuge of heat on the scope. The thermal stayed blind. He stood on the wet asphalt in a pair of stitched leather boots that had never seen this much moisture, and watched me watch him. I asked if I could look in the back. He nodded. The suitcase was zipped. The leather jacket smelled faintly of cedar. On the seat behind the driver, a child's plastic hair clip glimmered with rhinestones. On the floor, a grocery receipt had bled ink until the letters ran away. The air did not hold any memory of breath. "You have people in your family named Camilo?" I asked, because the older man had been Camilo, and it seemed like this road was forcing me to choose how crazy I wanted to sound. "My grandfather," he said. He looked past me toward the floodlights as if they were stars. "He used to take us to San Angelo every spring. He's gone now." He didn't say when. He said it with a finality that put the deck down between us. Then he smiled, that same easy smile, and my throat muscle did its trick again. When I handed him back his license, my fingers slipped, and the card flipped and landed face down on the wet asphalt. He bent to get it at the same time I did, and for a second our faces were close. His breath did not fog. His pupils were wider than the light warranted. He smelled like a clean closet and something older, something that reminded me of the church that drove a mission truck past the checkpoint twice a year. He stood up. I stood up. The radio at my hip said 1539 in that same soft other voice. I waved him through. We didn't talk for a while. What was there to say without making it sound like a campfire dare? The fog grew thicker, which I would have put in my report if it had mattered. The moths gave up and went somewhere else in a cloud. A train sounded far off, its horn dragging a low note across the river. At 2:40 a.m., and I write the time because I made myself check it, the camera on the far side of the cones caught movement in the brush and switched to night mode for a second. The monitor screen went to green-white and showed a line of pale shapes at the edge of the caliche, blurred by the dew. Not faces. Not bodies. The impression of people in a way that our techs would have told me was compression artifact if they weren't scared of lying on official channels. The shapes turned and the camera auto-tracked and lost the lock because there was no heat signature for it to chase. I went out with my flashlight against every memo that says you don't go out there alone. I told Maria and Sandoval to stay on the radios. The fog thickened one more degree the way a hand tightens on your shoulder. The prints found me before I found them, fresh wet ones overlapping, walking alongside the shoulder as if whoever made them had decided to take the easy way. They ran parallel to the cones for 15, maybe 20 yards, and then angled toward the road. When they hit the edge of the asphalt, they didn't stop. They went out into the lane and then angled across the divider into the oncoming side like a school crossing that had not been painted. I stood in the middle of US 277 and listened for the long shape of a truck, for the unbroken note of tires, for anything that said I should get out of the way, and I heard nothing but the generator and the moisture coming off the darkness. I followed the prints to the far shoulder and watched them mount the caliche on the other side. They kept going in a firm straight line as if someone had somewhere to be. I traced them until my light caught the fence line. At the fence, the prints climbed a low spot, which would have made sense for a living man. On the other side, the ground was white and hard. 10 feet in the line opened up like a zipper and became 3 lines. 10 feet after that, 5. Children's feet and adult feet, and something with a long, narrow foot that made me think of men, with boots slipped off and their toes clenched against cold. 70 feet past the fence, the lines resolved and walked side by side, a family crossing a parking lot. And then they stopped. Not faded, not trailed and lost, stopped. The last impression was sharp enough that a drop of water sat pooled in the hollow. Beyond it, the caliche was perfect. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that shift. We turned in our notes and the supervisor put a hand over his mouth while he read, and then made a new formal file named with numbers instead of words. He told us to stay quiet. We were already quiet. Maria changed to daytime patrol for a while. Sandoval took sick leave he had let rot for years. I stayed and worked the nights because it felt like leaving would make it true. On the 3rd night, the fog returned exactly the same way. The generator threw the same heartbeat and the thermal camera clicked through like a metronome. The road to Del Rio showed a gray hall and the road to Sonora showed another. At 11:17, a boy walked out of the brush between the cones. He was the age of a confirmation photograph in a small West Texas church. 13, 14, dark hair cut short, t-shirt damp enough to cling to his ribs. He had no shoes. His feet were wet and white around the edges where damp had made the skin go soft. His eyes had that same wider than they should be look. I did not reach for my gun. I did not reach for the radio. I spoke his mother's name before I realized I knew it.
He stopped like he had reached the invisible line you put in front of dogs you don't want to run into the street. "You've been out there a while,"
I said, and the words felt like I was reading them off a card in another language. "Do you need water?" He nodded, then he shook his head. I asked where he had come from, and he looked toward the fence where the lines had ended and said a word that sounded like two names pressed together. It wasn't a town. It wasn't the name of a ranch. It sat wrong in my ear. I gave him a bottle. He did not drink. He held it like a candle and made his mouth into a line that I think was supposed to be grateful. "Do you need a car?" I asked, and I don't know why I asked that. Only that the urge to offer a ride to a person who had not asked was sudden and huge. The way a tide will grab both your calves and pick you up. He shook his head again. He looked through me at the light pole, and I knew without knowing why that the pole was in a different place where he was seeing from. Then he stepped to the side and walked around the cones and into the lane. And I walked with him because my body decided it would. And we stood on the white line together and watched nothing move on a federal highway at 1119 in the state of Texas. He put the water bottle down in the middle of the lane as if he didn't want to carry it across. He looked at me like he wanted me to come with him, and I wanted to be the kind of agent who says no when something is off the map. But he had a small old scar at the corner of his eyebrow, and for a reason I could not explain it made my heart climb into my throat. I took one step onto the opposite lane. I heard Maria shout my name, and I heard the radio say 1541, and I heard my own boot lift and set. The boy smiled the way the Reyes men had smiled in their vans, and then he was not there. There was nothing to hide him, no brush. No fog dense enough at that second to hide a whole body. He closed like a hand into a pocket. The water bottle remained. It tipped and rolled and came to rest against the raised dot of the lane divider. I put my hands on my knees and tried to breathe without sounding like I had run. After that night, the file grew pages it did not want. There were grainy screenshots from the thermal of cars that didn't glow. There were photographs of wet prints that started from dry asphalt and ended in a windless blank. There was a note in my handwriting I do not remember writing. The ink bloomed by humidity, where I had copied a line of radio traffic and then written beneath it my mother's name. She died when I was 29. I changed the lock code on my phone and set my alarm for the times I needed, and went back to the checkpoint. The older men on the job will tell you that the river makes doors when the pressure is right, and that roads are the river's cousins. They'll say there are aduanas in places that aren't on maps, and that every now and then someone goes through one, with or without meaning to. It sounds like superstition until you stand in the light of the poles and watch the fog hold its breath, and the road go still as a polished bone. A month after the fog's first night, on a shift that felt normal enough that I had let myself hum a tune, a supervisor from Laredo came up with 2 techs, and they recalibrated the camera and replaced the scope, and told us bad things happen when good machines are out of alignment. They stayed until 10 and left early because the generator gave a hiccup it hadn't given in years, and one of the techs made a joke about ghosts and luck. As their taillights sank, I felt the same pressure in the air I feel when a storm line is 2 counties over and heading due north. I looked at Maria. She did not need to say anything. She unbuttoned the outer clasp of her vest the way she does when she wants her lungs to have room. Sandoval cleared his throat. The floodlights made the fog into a wall again. The minivan came back. 3rd time. Same shape, no glow. This time I didn't go through the dance alone. I had Maria walk the perimeter with a light, and I had Sandoval place the K9 where the dog could make the call if the world stopped making sense. The van stopped at the line and the window rolled down, and the man had Camilo's mouth and Daniel's eyes, and the time a family carries inside its bones. He said he was going east to San Angelo to say hello and that he was late because he had to stop and check the tires. I asked him if he knew his way, and he said he did, that he had driven this road since before I was born, and that if I kept an eye on the fog I would learn how to read it. I asked him if he had ever taken this road when it was quiet enough to hear your own breathing. He said he had, and then he added that there is a place between our places and that sometimes the two are neighbors in ways that make us think of each other when we should be thinking of ourselves. He smiled as if he had not meant to say that much. I watched my hand return his documents as if my hand belonged to a man who did not believe in what his life was showing him. I waved him on because to do anything else felt like putting a boot against a hinge that was not meant for me. He drove forward and the fog lifted in the wash of his tires and came back down behind him, as if the air had remembered it had a job. When he was gone, I saw small wet crescents on the asphalt where someone had stood beside the van in the lane, as if a group had gathered close to the sliding door and waited for a cue and then turned all at once. They were child small and adult big and something in between, and the crescents angled toward the far shoulder and stopped where the caliche began. That was the last night I worked primary. They moved me to transport and then to a training schedule that put me behind desks and screens, and across from young men with clean boots and eyes that did not yet know the texture of fog at 2 a.m. I told them what I could without telling them the thing that lived in my throat. When they asked what to do if the instruments disagree with your gut, I gave them the official answer. It felt like leaving a part of my body on the side of that highway. When I do hop rides now and then, when the schedule bends wrong and I need the generator's heartbeat to steady me, I ask for the later hours, and I ask for the spot with the dead radio zone. I stand with my hand up and down and I say the same words in the same calm voice. And sometimes I see a sticker in a rear window pull a memory hard enough to make my fingers tremble. The techs change the camera again and the pole and even the mount. They move the cones 20 feet and repainted the stop line, and the fog does not care. When it wants to come, it comes. 2 months after they stepped me away from primary, a trooper out near Cristoval called in a wreck that made the news for a morning and then vanished. A minivan crossed the center line and drifted like a boat. No brakes, no skid marks, no adjustments, as if the driver had fallen asleep and been placed gently by a hand. The trooper said there were footprints on the shoulder in the dew when he arrived. Bare ones, small and large, leading out into the scrub where the soil is powder fine and doesn't love to give you anything back. He followed them until they stopped like a sentence that someone decided not to finish. The driver's name was listed with the other names on a page that people scroll past unless a friend shares it with a broken heart emoji. I printed it and put it in my desk under a stack of renewal forms. I do not read it. I know the letters on it whether I look or not. On windless nights, washed white by the poles when the moths come back and throw themselves at the bulbs like a soft rain, I think about the way the prints looked when they stepped off our road and onto their own. We are trained to trust the instruments. The instruments tell you when a warm body is near or a hot engine or a wrong shape in the wrong place. The instruments don't tell you what to do when the road unbuttons and another road runs alongside it for 10 yards. 10 months, 10 years, and people step off one onto the other without making up their minds to do it. I can stand and put my palm on the pole where the scope used to be and feel the vibration of the wind playing the wires inside. If I close my eyes, I can hear channel 2 at 1535 and then 1539 and then 1541, and the names of people who loved each other spoken by voices that say them the way you say them when the person is not in the room, but you want them to be. I open my eyes and count the cones and the dots and the reflectors and the distance to the fence, and I can tell you in feet and inches how far it is to the caliche lip where the first line of prints turned into 3. When I walk out there unofficial and alone, I can still see the last pooled drop in the hollow of a heel. I step into it and it fits. I lift my boot and there is nothing underneath. On those nights I wave cars through and keep my voice calm and do not tell anyone that the world is a little thinner here. That our checkpoint is not only ours, that the other side has a checkpoint too, and sometimes they wave through something that walks away in wet footprints that vanish, where the caliche decides it does not want to take impressions anymore. If anyone asks me what I do when that happens, I tell them the truth that fits in a report. I say I document. I say I advise supervisory. I say I return to position. The rest is not for my side of the road. The fog settled over the bay like wool, and by 2 a.m. it was thick enough to taste. Diesel hummed through the deck. The bow door wore a beard of condensation, and beneath the rail the water sounded like someone sanding a floor, slow and gritty. I pulled the manifest out of the plastic sleeve clipped by the wheelhouse hatch, wrote the hour with a wax pencil that always smeared, and did what I always did at the start of a fog advisory run. I counted. The ferry breathed like an animal. Fans above the lanes thumped and the engines kept their steady heartbeat. Sodium lights under the canopy flattened everything to one tone, the yellow of an old photograph. I walked past each bumper with my clicker in my fist, the numbers snapping softly as I passed them. 1, 2, 3. The fog had turned the headlights to pale coins, hollow swallowed by the mist. The drivers were the usual mix for this hour, a shrimp boat crew in a mud-flecked Ford with a cooler full of bait, a nurse in scrubs from the Bolivar side, face pale in the glow of a phone, A truck with a generator lashed down in back, towel flapping on the tailgate like a flag that had given up. A couple sleeping under a blanket in a Subaru that still smelled new. 12 spaces on the manifest. 12 vehicles listed from the approach lane cameras. Plates read by the eye up on the mast when they rolled on. A full load for the night boat in fog. I finished the count at the stern gate and my thumb caught on the clicker again on instinct. It gave 2 quick ticks I hadn't meant. 14. I blinked and walked back through slower. You do it by habit, but you also do it because of what the bay teaches you. It takes what you don't nail down. Tools, hats, attention, days. I made myself see every bumper, every chrome grin, every sticker for high school bands and golf bait shops, every thumbprint on every license plate. I counted roof racks and the slick of moisture on hoods. 12. I reset the clicker and did it again. 14. There were spots where the condensation ran in little beads, marking dirt trails on paint. I smelled brine strong enough to sting. The ferry always smells like water and rubber and old coffee, but this was different, like the bay itself stood on the lanes. The fans coughed twice. Up in the wheelhouse, Mercer's shape leaned forward in the window, hands on the controls. He had brought us in through worse. He could slow dance a ferry through a fog bank with the bow door a foot from the bollards without touching steel. He had the foghorn on interval, long calls at the channel, shorter as we eased for the cross. The horn was a giant's note through cotton. It felt like it came from inside your ribs. I stepped around a puddle at the end of lane 2. The deck scuppers there were always ornery, but the water wasn't deck wash. It was clear, with a film on top that made a rainbow under the lights. Cold sprayed my shin the way water does when something wets your pants higher than you want, and your body says this is not a place it belongs. I looked up. 2 cars sat nose to stern with their headlights off, windows gray, the kind of polite spacing people leave when they don't want to touch a stranger's bumper. I didn't remember them rolling on. A sedan with a roofline like a knuckle, and behind it a station wagon the color of old money. Both were wet, not just beaded from the fog, but running with it, like they had been pulled up from a rinse and rolled straight here. I checked the manifest again. 12 plate numbers. My own handwriting, the sharp way I do a 7. No room for a mistake. The security camera above me made the tick-tick that means it's moving, lens flicking in the fog. I could go back to the wheelhouse and ask Mercer if he saw 14 through the rail, and he'd say with the patience of a man who ends his nights with a cigarette and a silent bay, count them again. Sometimes fog makes ghosts. He'd tell me to stop seeing them. I didn't want to radio anything. The horn sounded again. Everything went softer after. The noise of the generator truck, the cough of the Ford's exhaust, the murmur of the nurse on the phone telling someone she was almost home. I slipped my hand under the sedan's mirror and ran my fingers on the underside. They came away wet, cold water. The kind you get mixing bay and river. The kind that brings up a faint smell of dead grass and oyster shells. A strand of eelgrass lay against the sedan's grill like someone had tucked hair behind a face. Evening, I said, stupidly, because it's what you say if you think someone is in there and you don't want to scare them. No one moved. The windows were fogged from the inside, but not like breath. The condensation puffed and streamed in patterns I'd seen on house windows during a storm power outage, water moving as if the pane were the skin of a sleeping animal. I followed the drip down. The water ran along the tire and to the deck. It split in the weird way liquids do when they find a seam, and half went toward the scupper, and half made its own path under the next car over. Small fish smell. I bent lower. A clear gob of something caught on the tread. I picked it free. Slime the way riverweed leaves slime, and inside it a tiny thing like a translucent seed. I tilted it and it rolled with a lazy weight. I let it go. It slid across the deck and kissed the scupper grate and vanished. We were halfway across. You feel it even without the windows. The ferry's movement changes from fight to glide. Mercer eased the throttle a little and the fans made their shrug sound when they shift. I went back to the stern gate and clicked the counter at each car. 12. But when I let my eyes unfocus and counted differently, the way you count chairs in a church basement when someone says there aren't enough, they broke into a baker's dozen and a pair lurking in the corner. The hood lines of the 2 wet cars stayed in my head. They were the kind of cars you don't see much anymore except in photographs. Long, thin chrome around the headlights, bumpers like furniture. The wagon had a family sticker so old it had bubbled and gone tan. The figures stood in a row, a man, a woman, 2 kids, and a dog. The dog had ears. The man held a fishing rod. I told myself when we touched the landing on the boulevard side, the crew at the ramp would see what I saw. The bow door would drop on the damp concrete and the line would creep. And if 14 rolled off while I had 12 on paper, I could tell the dispatch office to check the cameras and they'd shrug and log it. Things go wrong in fog, but the bay still minds a ledger. The bay keeps its account. The deck speaker crackled. Mercer liked a little music during slack hours. I expected his old country picks, songs thick with pedal steel and men regretting decisions. What came through was a voice, not loud, the opposite, like someone speaking with their mouth beside your ear while you watch something important happen and they didn't want to interrupt. It said numbers. It was the same calm you hear from pilots and emergency room admins and the voice that announces at the DMV when your number is up. 14, it said. Then it said names, not all of them, one name. My brother's. I snapped my head toward the wheelhouse. The lights up there were a pale box in the fog. A figure moved. It could have been Mercer, and he could have had the radio onto the Coast Guard channel and someone could have set a list for a training exercise. I knew better. The number sat in the speakers like a coin on a tongue. 14. The fans rose and settled in reply. A gull ghosted past the light and vanished. The line of its wing a single brushstroke. We bumped the landing. You feel it in your knees. You can tell a good landing by how little your teeth notice. We kissed concrete. The horn sounded shorter for local rooms. The bow door cranked down with the wet sound of chain traveling over something that didn't want to be touched. Foundational noises. I gave the lanes the signal. Palms up and float them. The way dance teachers do, the way priests do when they start to say a blessing. The Ford growled. The nurse's Honda clicked into drive. The Subaru woke with a throat clearing. Wheels turned, the line crept. The generator truck driver gave me the two-finger tired thank you get at 3 a.m. when everyone is only skin over caffeine. The sedan in lane 2 did not move. The station wagon sat patient as a parked thought. The flow moved around them. We offloaded at a slow, fog-slow trickle, and the air on the landing side was colder as if it had been refrigerated. The ferry sighed as weight left. When the last car rolled over the lip and onto the ramp, the ferry rose half an inch, and you feel that too if you have worked the deck too long. Space opened where there should have been 2 cars. The deck there was wet. I walked to the place and put a boot in the center where the 2 had been. The soles squeaked. The water stood in patches welling from nothing, each one round as if dripping from a drip line from above that wasn't there. I ran my hand along the lane marker, a faded white. It came away with grit, but the grit wasn't paint dust. It was sand. Not beach sugar. Bay sand. Heavy with mica. Flecks glinting in the sodium light like a field under a moon. A small green thread lay atop it, eelgrass again, or the ancestor of eelgrass. When I lifted it, it broke as if it had dried in the sun 100 years ago. "Jay," Mercer called from the hatch. "Send the all clear." I sent the all clear with my arm, and the crewman on the landing echoed it. We took on the next load, 12 on the manifest again, 12 blinking in the gray. I counted 14. By the second crossing, I had my routine messed. You get your body used to a pattern, and the bay punishes you if you think you created it. I kept looking at the stern where the wet had been. It dried slower than it should have in that moving air, as if the deck didn't want it gone. The fan housings dripped from their rims onto the lanes like old buildings in a northern city during thaw. I studied the 2 places in the line, and when the wheels rolled on at the Galveston side, a man in an old Astros cap drove into one of the spots and looked around as if he had taken someone else's seat. He stuck his arm out, and the skin on it was the chapped red of someone who works outside. He tapped the roof with the back of his knuckles. It made a tone that didn't match the car. A dull bell, something underwater struck by a diver. I went up to the wheelhouse on the 3rd crossing. Mercer kept the throttle low, old hands on the controls. He had the hat he always wore during graveyard shifts, a plain cap with a fish stitched on. His coffee steamed in the cup holder. Beyond him, the fog sat on the bow like something living. He didn't look away from the window when I came in. 14, he said, as if we were discussing the weather. 14, I said. He nodded once. It gets that way when the fog runs down your spine. Hush now and then. The bay remembers its dead in math. What's water anyway, except a habit? We stood together, quiet except for the whine of the gyros and the distant bell of a buoy that hadn't been struck by anything visible. I watched the radar, the green line of the channel glowering at us and the soft stippled ghosts of other boats shifting in their lanes. Mercer thumbed the horn again. He looked down at the clipboard where our manifest lived and set a finger on my 12. I saw his finger move like a second hand and tap twice on the margin in a rhythm that made the hair on my forearm stand. He said nothing else. Some bosses tell you a thing by not telling you, and some ship things can't be said full voice anyway or they grow teeth. At Bolivar, the bow door went down, and again we offloaded. The nurse had already turned around to make the return trip, eyes bruised with tired, an energy drink open in her cup holder. The shrimp boat crew had bought coffee from the kiosk, and the steam rose from their cups like little chimneys. The 2 spots in lane 2 were full. The drivers braked when they saw the door drop. Nothing between them and the night. They put their cars in drive. Everything left but those 2 which had never been asked to leave. When the last of the real dozen moved, the 2 wet cars blinked their lights once, not bright, as if from some deep old battery, as a fish might make a flash in dark water. The wagon's family sticker had a small crack across it now. The man's fishing rod had a line drawn on the decal, and the tip of it reached the dog's tail. I had the feeling you get when you realize a photograph on a shelf has moved without falling. When the wedding picture tilts in the frame and you know it's because the house settled, and you also know that is not what made it tilt. My radio hissed with an old kind of radio hiss. A tape hiss, a snow you could warm your hands over. A voice said lane 2 in a tone that made lane 2 sound like a coordinate in a war. I keyed my mic. It popped. Say again. The radio sounded like it had water on its circuit board. It said 2 names. The first my brother again, and the second a surname I had only seen carved into the white stone in the little cemetery near the Point Bolivar lighthouse, where the wind never stops. There's a fence there that the sea has licked salt from since it was new. I used to go there with my father when I was a boy to look at the old keeper's stones. I found my own last name there once where it did not belong, and convinced myself that generations can share more than a county without sharing a bloodline. It is an old trick of the coast. Everything repeats until it breaks. I walked to the sedan's window and put my palm on it. The glass breathed. My handprint bloomed, and then the print filled with water and ran down the inside of the pane. Inside the car, something made a sound like a seatbelt ratcheting back into its house. I smelled a perfume I remembered from a long time ago. A cheap berry smell, the kind that never commits to being fruit or flower. I leaned to see inside. The interior was darker than it should have been, like a deeper fog had been poured into it and the fairy lights could not reach through the spill. The dashboard clock showed a time I knew wasn't ours. It showed the time on the state trooper's accident report when they found my brother's truck upside down in a flood ditch on a night like this one, years back. The number tomorrow belonged to. I did what you do when the bay shows you a tally that doesn't match the ledger. You make a deal with what you can see. I slid the wheel chocks out and put one behind each rear tire of the dripping cars. Rubber on wet deck. I told myself I was stopping something that wasn't moving. I waited for the weight of the car to press against the block the way it does when you keep a parked thing from unrolling. No pressure came. I looked at the bow door. No one stood on the ramp. The landing crew were shadows in the house at the end of the concrete, low voices. The fog had closed us into a private room. I could hear fish pop under the stern, the sound like a man clicking with his tongue. The fans above the lanes slowed for a beat, and that was when it changed. The water that had been standing in the round patches on the deck shifted toward the scuppers all at once, as if the deck had tipped though it had not. It moved not in one direction but in many small directions that somehow agreed. The puddles thinned, and where each thinned, something showed in the steel, something like a word you needed to turn your head to see. The paint there had been scored by tires 1,000 times and the lines looked like the faintest writing. You get taught a lot of things working this job. You learn to ignore faces and waves. You learn to count right because counting wrong gets people hurt. You learn not to read words in patterns that aren't letters. You learn to fail at that one when the bay wants you to. The lines made 10 letters. They made my last name and then they wiped themselves clean as if a wet rag had passed. The sedan and the wagon were not there when I looked back up. I hadn't seen them move. One moment water, chrome, eelgrass, the old sticker family lined up against the yellow. The next moment space where they had been with the quiet that follows a sneeze. The chocks lay a foot apart, kissed by the retreating water. A single dry strip ran under them. The deck had the faintest smell of something burnt, like the smell a light bulb leaves when it dies. We took on another load. Mercer said nothing. On the 5th crossing, the fog opened enough to see shapes on the Bolivar shore, the lighthouse a heavy pen line against gray. The deck was a normal deck. The fans hummed. The nurse finally left the ferry for good and drove into the dark toward Crystal Beach lights that looked like dropped beads. The generator truck driver had gone. The Ford boys were laughing at something on someone's phone. The world came back with its usual amount of strangeness. When I checked the manifest at Lawrence's desk in the office at the end of shift, I stopped to read the clipboard with the pencil marks from weeks back. There was a paper in the middle with a crease worn into it like a tired man's mouth line. Date 3 years ago. Fog advisory. 12 on paper. Lawrence had scribbled something in the margin in his tight printing. 14 counted by deck. 2 extra never offloaded. Ask Mercer. I stared at the names he had written under that. 2 family names I recognized from Stone's, and then a third, which was my own. I took the late break and walked outside into air that felt wrung out. The fog had begun to lift, pulled up by whatever pulls water out of heat. The bay ran black, a thin lace of chop. Gulls hung as if pinned to the sky. A freighter moved through the channel like a city block that had started to travel. I stood at the rail and looked back at our lanes. They are just steel, but they hold imprints if you stand there and let your eyes soften. The coast is made of layers. Hurricanes, rides, the way kids learn to drive in parking lots at midnight. You can see all of it if you stay still enough. When my shift ended, I signed my name on the sheet and rubbed the stiffness out of my fingers. The night clerk handed me a coin someone had left in the lost and found and said it looked like mine. It was a token, heavy for its size, with the ferry's outline on one side and what looked like a date on the other. The date was wrong. It was old, from the toll days before I was born. Someone had rubbed it until the numbers looked like they were bleeding back into metal. I closed my hand around it and felt how cold it stayed. The kind of cold you keep by putting something in deep water. I slept late and woke to clear light and the gulls' foolish screaming. On my next night, the fog rolled in again, and the horn sounded the way it does when it wants the bay to answer. The manifest paper was new. The pencil I used was the same old stub notch where my thumb sits. 12 listed by the eye. I walked to the stern with my clicker and counted 14. When my shift ended, I signed my name on the sheet and rubbed the stiffness out of my fingers. The night clerk handed me a coin someone had left in the lost and found and said it looked like mine. It was a token, heavy for its size, with the ferry's outline on one side and what looked like a date on the other. The date was wrong. It was old, from the toll days before I was born. Someone had rubbed it until the numbers looked like they were bleeding back into metal. I closed my hand around it and felt how cold it stayed. The kind of cold you keep by putting something in deep water. I slept late and woke to clear light and the gulls' foolish screaming. On my next night, the fog rolled in again, and the horn sounded the way it does when it wants the bay to answer. The manifest paper was new. The pencil I used was the same old stub, notch where my thumb sits. 12 listed by the eye. I walked to the stern with my clicker and counted 14. I didn't try to make the numbers match anymore. I did what a person does when they learn which part of a mystery is theirs to carry. I made sure real rubber and real steel did what they were supposed to. I cleaned the scuppers when they choked on eelgrass that didn't belong to this century. I left 2 chocks by lane 2. When we kissed the landing and the door dropped and the line crept, I watched the 2 spots that were not on paper. I watched them remain while everything else rolled, and I told myself a story that made it easier to lift my arms and wave the offload along. We take people across and back. We take them to their night shifts and their fishing trips and their quiet mistakes. Sometimes we take cargo that never meant to leave the water. Sometimes we carry weight you can count, and sometimes we carry its echo. If the bay is a ledger, the ferry is the pencil. There are names you don't say on the radio because the radio will say them back late when you are alone. There are cars no one drives that drip water on the deck and let eelgrass dry into thread. There are nights when the voice in the speaker speaks softly so as not to interrupt, and tells you the number that belongs to your life, which might always be too higher than what you think you can bear. I still go by the little cemetery by the lighthouse on days off. The wind there writes on your skin the way sand does, and the stones accept that writing without complaint. There are 2 new markers no one visits who looks like they belong in the present. They have dates that make a kind of sense if you tilt your head. At the base of one is a small metal coin half buried by dune grass. I leave it where it lies. I have the ferry token in my pocket because everything that crosses wants a proof. I stand by the fence and look toward the channel. The ferries move back and forth, their wake lines crossing and then smoothing. Birds stitch the air. Somewhere beyond the point, a horn calls, and the fog answers out of habit. And somewhere on the deck, a man with a counter in his palm moves his thumb out of rhythm and hears the number that explains nothing and everything, and his name whispered in the kindest tone, as if all of us are being counted gently and the bay, for once, doesn't mind remembering.